Welcome to Ichiraku Ramen, and thank you for joining me for another journey into the world of shinobi. Before we begin, I want to give a huge thank you to everyone who listens, supports the channel, and enjoys these stories. Today's story is part 5 and the last of an emperor's youth. Gifted with a rare bloodline, incredible instincts for taijutsu, and guided by an unpredictable teacher, Naruto begins his shinobi career far earlier than anyone expected. But growing stronger also means seeing the world more clearly. Determined to live life on his own terms, Naruto begins to question what it truly means to be a shinobi of Konoha. With every mission and every battle, the distance between him and the village seems to grow. Will Naruto find his place among the shinobi of the leaf, or will the very village he protects push him away forever? This is a fan-made story inspired by the world of Naruto. All characters in the original universe belong to their respective creators. This narration is created for entertainment purposes as part of a transformative storytelling experience. The story itself was written by Red Ninjalas 19, and full credit goes to the original author. If you would like to read the original version, the link to the story is included in the video description below. Now, sit back, relax, and enjoy. Chapter 25. I'm sorry, Hokage-sama. Hiruzen felt every single year of his long lifetime. He was too old for this. You are confident he is headed towards the land of water? He clarified. I am, Hokage-sama, Kakashi confirmed. The Junin looked rough. Had it not been stated in the man's report, Hiruzen would have known this mission had gone sideways. Kakashi was one of his most capable Junin, and the man had survived the worst missions in Anbu for 10 years. It took a lot to take the man off guard. The presence of Momochi Zabuza had been an unforeseen complication, and he would be speaking to the Mission Assignment Division about performing due diligence when assigning ranks to missions in the future. I see, he sat back into his chair. I sent the Anbu the moment your summon reported in, so we should find him quickly. Hiruzen wished he could say he had not seen this coming. Naruto had been unhappy in the village for a long time, and he was ashamed to say he had been a contributing factor in that. He was not sure what to do with the boy. He had provided a home and provisions after the fiasco at the orphanage in his early years, and he had tried to check in with the boy when he could. He knew the villagers had treated him less than favorably, and he had not managed to keep the secret of the Kyuubi well enough to protect Naruto, but no one would dare to try and outright hurt the boy. He just had so much anger, and Hiruzen had not known what to do. Forcing the boy to socialize angered him, and separating him was not fair to him either. He could not make Naruto understand that Hiruzen was just trying to look out for him, as his parents would have wanted. Guy had a wonderful influence on him, and Hiruzen regretted splitting the pair up. It did not change the fact that Naruto still required a team to take the exams, but perhaps in hindsight there were other, better options that would not have driven the boy to these extremes. Regardless, that did not give Naruto the right to become a missing nin, and Hiruzen could not give him special treatment. The Kyuubi would guarantee he kept his life, but out-of-village missions would no longer be an option, considering his flight risk status. Danzo was sure to have strong opinions about what would happen to the boy from here on out. I will head out to join them, Hokage-sama. You will not, Hiruzen disagreed. You will go to the hospital to heal and allow the Anbu to do their jobs. Hokage-sama, I am one of the best trackers in the village. I should be out there looking for him. He rarely ever heard Kakashi speak with such emotion in his voice. He was sure the man had to be feeling guilty, but Hiruzen could not allow him to leave in such a condition. The village could not afford to lose the copy nin. Kakashi's feelings on Minato and Kushina were clouding his judgment. One of, Hiruzen nodded. Not the only. Leave this to the team, Kakashi-kun. You brought your genin back safely and completed the mission. That is your duty as a Junin sensei. Although he supposed that Naruto was technically the one to complete the mission. Kakashi seemed to think it was a distraction, but Hiruzen could not help but feel there was more to this. Naruto killed Gato and liberated the land of waves behind the backs of his teammates when he did not have to. The boy never did anything without a reason, but what that could be escaped him. Kakashi slumped. Yes, Hokage-sama. Go to the hospital, Kakashi-kun. Sasuke-kun, Sakura-chan. I am sorry this has happened. This will not affect your standing nor your career paths. We will handle this situation as quickly and painlessly as possible. Will, Sakura hesitantly spoke up, when Naruto comes back, will he come back to our team? I am afraid it is too early to say, Hiruzen said not unkindly. We will need to bring Naruto home first and then the council will meet to decide. She nodded, her gaze dropping sullenly to the floor. Sasuke remained silent, continuing to look out of the window and refusing to meet the eyes of anyone in the room. From what Hiruzen knew, Naruto was not a team player nor did he get along with anyone his own age. He was a bit surprised about how affected his teammates were. Perhaps they had grown closer than they had thought. Kakashi had reported when the team first formed that Naruto and Sasuke had known each other beforehand, but he also had not reported a drastic change in Naruto's attitude towards people his own age. There was also the scenario that his teammates thought they were closer than Naruto did. He could see that happening. Go home, Team 7, he dismissed. You will be informed of any updates when they arrive. The three bowed and shuffled out of the room, a depressing cloud following them. He wondered if Naruto had considered the effect of his leaving on the team. Likely not. He was not the most sensitive to the feelings of others. He sighed heavily, too tired to even reach for his pipe. He really was too old for this, but there was one more thing he had to do. He leaned forward, dragging a parchment over to begin drafting a letter. Jiraiya needed to know his godson had defected and become a missing nin. His former student was sure to take it hard, especially with what happened with Orochimaru and his guilt and grief over losing Minato too soon, but he had to know. Having one more set of eyes looking for the boy before the worst happened could not hurt, and Jiraiya would be invested in bring back the boy safely. Once he did, he could have a word with him about the mantle of Hokage. It was time for Hiruzen to retire. One thing Naruto could say since landing on the next island was that the place lived up to its name as the Land of Water. He had always thought that the country had earned its name due to the fact it was a collection of islands surrounded by the sea for as far as the eye could see, but there was just as much water inland. During his journey through the biggest island towards the capital, which was not on the coast like he thought, he had passed numerous lakes, and that wasn't even taking into consideration the weather. He knew it would be different, coming from the Land of Fire, but he did feel like he would never be warm or dry again. The mist that settled on the land never seemed to budge, only interrupted by the occasional shower. There were rivers from the sea that led into the capital, and there were a bunch of boats that acted as transport, but walking was free. He'd also been trapped on boats since he'd left the Land of Waves, so it was nice to stretch his legs even if everything was damp. He didn't know why he hadn't thought to steal a jacket from Tezuna's when he had pilfered the hat, but he would have to find one when he reached the capital. The foot traffic around him was beginning to pick up, and he finally saw walls start to rise in the horizon. He adjusted the pack on his shoulders and picked up the pace. It wasn't long before he reached the gates, shortly being waved in by the guards after he waved the letter from his grandfather. He took his first step into the capital of the Land of Water and grinned. It looked to be bigger than Konoha, but that could be because of the structure of the place. Wide canals ran through the village instead of roads, and many small boats were floating gently along. There were small paths that ran alongside these canals, but that mainly seemed to be for stalls and colorful shopfronts. There were many more people on the small gondolas than there were walking along the edge. It was a shame he couldn't use his water walking here, but it was a small price to pay for the anonymity. As he walked further in, down one of the paths he took in the sights. It was so different to Konoha, it was amazing. He could get on board with hanging around here until he figured out his next steps. If it was as big as he was imagining anyway, he would need to explore and see if it would work. Konoha would be able to track him to the Land of Water, that was a guarantee, but they couldn't move freely inside their cities and villages. The Land of Water and Land of Fire were not allies, only tolerating each other, and their respective shinobi villages just avoided each other after the civil war in the Land of Water. As long as he kept his head down, acted like an ordinary civilian and updated his disguise, they shouldn't be able to find him here. He didn't like that he wouldn't be able to train, but it was just temporary until the heat died down. He wouldn't lose all his skills in a few weeks, and he would just train that much harder when he got the chance. He could imagine Sasuke's disapproving face at the plan, and Naruto knew that it wasn't something he would have been happy about if he was back in Konoha. The oppressive weight on his shoulders was gone now, though, and so was the burning fury in his gut. He still wanted to train and become strong enough that no one would ever be able to force him to do anything he didn't want to do, but the desperation behind it was gone. It felt like the weights around his ankles had been taken off and he could float away. He kind of wished Sasuke was here to share in this feeling, but he had different goals that leaving Konoha couldn't help, and Naruto could respect that. He would see him again and they could test how much they'd gotten stronger while they were apart. Guy-sensei's face briefly appeared in his thoughts and Naruto shoved it away. He didn't want to think about his teacher. He knew he'd betrayed the man by doing this. He knew he was a disappointment of a student. Guy-sensei must hate him now. Naruto had abandoned the village his teacher loved and left a black mark on the Junin's record. He couldn't regret it though, no amount of guilt would have been able to stop him. Guy-sensei may hate him now, but they wouldn't see each other again. Guy-sensei would heal and forget about him, and he had his team to focus on anyway. Naruto would just not think about it and it would eventually get easier. He would be able to think about Guy-sensei without this churning in his gut. He took a breath of the fresh, damp air, a grin slowly appearing on his face as he successfully shoved the darker thoughts away. He could definitely make this work. He hadn't done all of this just so he could be dragged back to Konoha, so he was going to make the most of it. He was free. Sasuke threw another punch at the log, ignoring the sting on his knuckles. Kakashi-sensei hadn't been cleared for duty yet since they'd come back to Konoha a few days ago, and he had no desire to train with Sakura. The only person he wanted to train with was running around another country with no regard for Sasuke. He couldn't really hold it against Naruto, but it still fucking sucked. Konoha sucked a lot more without him than he'd anticipated, and a tiny part of him wondered about what would have happened if he'd agreed to go with him. Not that he would have, standing by his point that a life on the run would be worse for his training than staying with the teachers and library of scrolls in Konoha, but still. He'd seen the Dobi at least once a week for years, going on daily for the last year, and now he was gone. Sasuke had taken the opportunity to train. He had to get stronger if he wanted to take down Itachi, and losing his training partner was not a reason to slack off. He was going to accomplish his goals with or without Naruto. The next time he saw the Dobi, he would show him how much stronger he'd become without him and smash his face into the ground. The thought helped. The worst thing about all of this was Sasuke was no longer eligible for the Chunin exams. He had asked Kakashi-sensei about it, but they had to be a three-man team and his teacher refused to pull in another genin with everything that was going on. So Sasuke was going to be held back as a genin for at least another 6 months, which was such bullshit. He remembered Naruto's rants about being held back, but Sasuke hadn't actually thought that would ever happen to him. He was more than strong enough to pass the shitty exams, and the fact that they were one teammate down was the only thing stopping them was infuriating. Naruto could seriously go fuck himself. He had told Sasuke that Konoha would hold him back and shove hurdles in his path, but the Dobi was the one fucking doing that by ditching them. He could understand why he'd left and he would have never tried to stop him, but he couldn't quite convince himself that it was the best option available to them. Understand the reason why didn't make it any easier to accept. It hadn't felt so hard back in the land of waves. It was so ironic that everyone else had wanted the blonde gone, but things were worse without him. You look like you're training hard. Sasuke whirled around at the unexpected voice. He'd chosen the most isolated training ground on purpose, unwilling to deal with anyone else right now. The guy was a few years older than him, with gray hair tied up into a ponytail and his hite covering his forehead. Sunlight reflected off the large round glasses on his face and dark eyes watched him. He was dressed a black turtleneck, in the standard shinobi uniform and sandal with no vest, must be a genin. Sasuke turned back to his training stump, figuring the guy would get the message. Missing your teammate? The question hit a little too hard for Sasuke and he spun, growling. I wouldn't miss that asshole. He wasn't missing Naruto. He was pissed at him for leaving and he would shove the difference in their strength down his throat when they next saw each other, but he didn't miss him. What do you even want? The guy raised his hands, palms up. I'm just wondering how you're holding up. The guy said. You can't take the Chunin exams, right? Sasuke's mood soured further. Who the fuck even are you? He snapped. My apologies, the genin lowered his hands. Yakushi Kabuto, fellow genin. It's nice to meet you, Sasuke-kun. Sasuke glared at him. I just thought it was a shame that you can't advance within the village. You don't deserve to be held back like that. What was his point? Sasuke knew he could ace these exams, but it didn't matter. Kakashi-sensei would never let them enter now. That had nothing to do with this guy though. Konoha struggles to see what's right in front of them, don't you think? Sasuke remained silent. I understand you have a goal, Sasuke-kun? That's none of your business. Of course, the slimeball smiled. I was just wondering how you were going to accomplish it in the village. I mean, your sensei is injured and occupied with your missing teammate and the girl is hardly on your level. I just wonder who you would be looking to for the kind of training you need. This guy wondered about a lot. Sasuke didn't like it. There was an agenda here and Sasuke didn't appreciate the fact that this guy thought Sasuke was too stupid to understand it. Yakushi's words held merit, saying everything Sasuke himself had been thinking about, but that didn't mean it would allow this guy to manipulate him. Get to the point or get lost, Sasuke growled. You want something and I'm not interested, I don't need anything from the likes of you. Ah, I'm sorry, Sasuke-kun. The guy continued smiling, but there was something empty about it. I would never think that I could help you. You are too strong for that. I was thinking more along the lines of finding another teacher for you. One stronger than Hitaki Kakashi that would focus on you and you alone. That sounded like a trap. There was no way there just happened to be a strong teacher just waiting to train Sasuke. I'm done here. Sasuke reached down to grab his stuff and started to make his way out of the training ground. Just think about it. Yakushi called behind him, but Sasuke ignored him. He didn't need Yakushi and he didn't need Naruto. He would defeat Itachi on his own. Neji followed his teammates down the street, easily dodging the villagers around them. The Chunin exams were so close he could taste them and he was ready for anything they had to throw at him. His time as Gai Sensei's student had been well spent and even his teammates would be hard to beat now. His gentle fist had come in leaps and bounds and he could beat anyone even close to his age when he was training in the clan, and Lee had yet to beat him either. His mood soured. There was one genin who could beat him and Neji hated it. He tried to avoid thinking about Naruto since their mutually beneficial training arrangement blew up in their faces. It was entirely the fault of the blonde and Neji stood by that opinion. Luckily he hadn't seen him around the village since their last argument, so it was easy to put the uzumaki out of his mind. He was able to use the jutsu the other genin taught him with no problems, although he was still keeping it a secret from the rest of his team. Oh, I'm so sorry. He raised an eyebrow at the girl who had walked into Lee. She was a bit shorter than Tenten, with long pink hair held out of her face by a Hite-8. She wore a deep red battle dress to her knees, open at the side to reveal black biker shorts with a kunai pouch on her right thigh. Soft green eyes were trained on Lee as she stammered another apology. Neji would have expected better situational awareness from a kunoichi in training. It is okay. Lee grinned widely in a mimic of Gai Sensei. You are the most beautiful flower I have ever had the fortune to lay eyes on. Go out with me. I will protect you until the day I die. Neji resisted the urge to face Palm. This was not the time for this. The Chunin exams started tomorrow. They didn't need any distractions. Oh, the green eyes widened. I can't. I'm sorry, I have a lot going on right now. Lee wilted and Neji rolled his eyes. You're Naruto's teammate, right? Tenten spoke up. I've seen you around the village with him on D ranks. Tears formed in the girl's eyes. Neji could only assume that sort of reaction came hand in hand with being on a team with Naruto. Yeah, she nodded, the tears clearing up as she blinked. Haruno Sakura. You are? Hagane Tenten. Tenten smiled. This is Rock Lee and Hyuga Neji. Nice to meet you. Haruno answered with a smile of her own, but it didn't reach her eyes. You know Naruto? Unfortunately, Neji finally spoke, crossing his arms. It was drowned out by Lee's reply. Naruto-senpai is a most youthful shinobi and I can only strive to follow his wonderful example. Neji eyebrow twitched. Senpai? Haruno frowned. He was Gai Sensei's student first, Tenten explained. Lee has taken to calling him senpai since he is our senior in terms of experience. Oh, Sakura replied. I had no idea. He's never said anything. Naruto is not a man of wasted words, Lee grinned. He is a man of action. I don't really know anything about him. It's not like he would ever share anything with me anyway. Haruno's voice was flat. I mean, I knew he was a genin for a few years before we became a team, but I guess I didn't really think about it. Are you going to the Chunin exams tomorrow? Neji cut in again. It was a dumb question, but Neji couldn't help but ask, just to be sure. There was no way Naruto was missing this. Neji had heard the whining enough times to know how much he wanted to sit these exams to progress in his career, and as much as he hated to admit it, Naruto could easily pass. He could have been Chunin a while ago if he'd been allowed to sit the exams when he'd first wanted to. He had a team now, so there should be nothing in his way, but he had been held back for so long he was now their problem. Naruto was the only one that could provide difficulty from Konoha, and the blonde was petty enough that Neji did not want to take any risks. Naruto would stomp on all of them to become Chunin without thinking twice. The fact he and Neji were still pissed at each other just made him that much more unpredictable. Haruno shook her head and Neji narrowed his eyes. There was no way Naruto would allow another Chunin exam to slip through his fingers. He would not put it past him to drag 2 corpses as his teammates just to sit the exam. What happened? He demanded, stepping forward. Tell me where Naruto is now. This was unacceptable. The blonde had the emotional stability of a 2-year-old, but he was damn strong. He had not a single doubt that Naruto would be one of the strongest in the village one day, even if he burned every bridge to get there. He may not want to associate with him anymore, but Naruto was the one to snap Neji out of fate's grasp, and that still meant something to him. The girl wouldn't look him in the eye. I can't tell you. What do you mean? Is he okay? Tenten asked, worried about the wrong thing. Naruto wouldn't let anything hold him back except himself, so whatever happened was self-inflicted. What could prompt this response? The only thing that he could think of was, he wouldn't. Has Naruto become a missing nin? He took another step closer, forcing the kunoichi to look him in the eye. Just nod. She hesitated, but she eventually gave a short nod, and something churned in Neji's gut. He ignored the reaction of his teammates as he ran through what he knew about Naruto. It made sense. The bastard absolutely would. Now that he thought about it, he was surprised that Naruto hadn't tried to leave earlier. He made it no secret that he hated living in Konoha. Neji didn't know why he was so thrown. It did make sense, and it wasn't like he and Naruto were on talking terms. They hadn't seen each other since that argument in the side street. Neji had no intentions of seeking him out, and he had no plans to patch things up with him. It shouldn't matter that he'd left the village. It didn't actually change anything in Neji's life. Naruto hadn't been a part of his life in weeks. But it did. It did change things, and Neji didn't know how to feel about that. Does Guy-sensei know? Neji looked at Tenten. He didn't even think of that. He had to know, right? There was no way that hadn't told him. I don't know. Sakura shook her head. I'm sorry. I am sure Naruto has a good reason, said Lee, but he was missing the cheerfulness from a moment ago. Naruto is an incredible shinobi who works hard than anyone I know. He must have a good reason. Neji personally thought Lee was lying to himself, but that wasn't his problem right now. They didn't have time for this right now. They had the Chunin exams tomorrow, and Neji refused to let Naruto get in their way. It was good riddance. They were better off without him. It was one less obstacle. Lee was not the only one lying to himself. The Kyuubi Jinchuriki is not in the village. Where is he? He did not return from their last mission. So we had to go hunt the brat down then. It appears so. It seems they suspect he was heading for the land of water. I guess we're visiting my homeland then. Chapter 26. I am sorry to pull you away from your team, Guy-kun, but this could not wait. Of course, Hokage-sama. Guy smiled brightly. My team are fully prepared for the exam tomorrow and will shine brightly in the springtime of their youth. I know they will do wonderfully. The atmosphere in the Hokage's office remained grim after his declaration. It's about Naruto. Guy's smile faltered. He had been looking for his student to wish him luck for the exams, but he had been unable to find his former apprentice or his team. He had heard Kakashi was in the village, so he knew they were not out on a mission, but he had not managed to track down his rival either. Kakashi had not avoided him like this since his Anbu days, but Guy had assumed he was preparing his genin team for the exam. Naruto was a determined young man, and now he had a real team. Guy had not a single doubt that his wonderful student would take the exams by storm, earn his Chunin vest, and take one step closer to his dreams. He has defected from Konoha. What? The Anbu are on his trail, and we have contacted Jiraiya. They should find him soon. Naruto had. You were his teacher for a long time, so I felt you deserved the courtesy of hearing it directly. What? It felt like Hokage-sama had driven a kunai straight into Guy's chest. Naruto had left Konoha? He knew that it was his goal, but Naruto had hoped to emulate the Sannin. He really thought his student was making strong strides towards his goal, so why would he suddenly run like this? What had changed? I'm sorry, Guy-kun. For once, he did not know how to respond. He could only stand there in silence, going over every single interaction he had had with Naruto in recent months. There had been nothing. He had been his teacher for 4 years, Guy should have noticed. How could he claim to care about the boy if he missed something like this? Did Naruto lose faith in him? How had he failed his student? Guy-kun. He swallowed, his throat dry. Hokage-sama. His leader looked at him with pity. We have always known Naruto's heart lay beyond the borders of this village. He only stopped his attempts to defect when he was young because he realized that it wouldn't work. He has obviously been planning this escape plan for a long time. It is a shock, yes, but not a surprise. Guy was surprised. Guy was very surprised. Focus on the team you have. Hokage-sama continued. They will need you for the rest of the Chunin exams. Anbu and Jiraiya will handle Naruto. He will be back soon enough. Naruto would never be allowed on missions again. He would be branded a flight risk. He would be confined to the village, if not outright imprisoned, until he could earn the trust of the village enough to be restored to normal duties. Guy knew that would never happen. They had not managed to foster a positive relationship with Naruto when he was not a criminal, but now? Of course, Hokage-sama, he bowed, turning to leave quietly. The door to the Hokage's office softly clicked shut. Guy loved Konoha. He loved this village with everything he had and he would gladly lay down his life for it. The will of fire burned brightly and Guy was so proud to be the sublime green beast of Konoha. He had never once wavered in this loyalty and he trusted Hokage-sama with his life, his team, his friends. Everything he had to give belonged to the village and its leader. He knew this was the protocol. They had to retrieve Naruto not only for his own safety but to protect the village from secrets being leaked to other villages. It was the same for anyone who defected. But Guy didn't want them to find him. He did not want Naruto to be dragged back kicking and screaming to a village he would never be able to leave. His mind kept being forced back to every mission they had spent outside the village and every moment of joy he got to experience with his student. Naruto had never been so light and free and vibrant and youthful than he had on those missions. Every time it was like seeing what his student could have been, and Guy had always hoped he could find that in Konoha one day. He had been naive. He loved Konoha and he was its loyal soldier, but he also loved Naruto and he was his teacher. It was the first time Guy had ever experienced such a divide within himself. Guy had never doubted his path and his loyalties, but he just could not bring himself to agree with Konoha on this. He wanted Naruto to be happy and free, and now it had reached this point. Guy knew that would only happen outside of Konoha. He wanted his student to be safe, but Naruto was strong. He had always been so strong and determined and diligent and a shining example of youth for all. He knew everyone else would have seen it eventually, but Guy was realistic enough to know that there was no turning back from this. Naruto had made his choice and there was nothing Guy could do about it. He wanted Naruto to be happy. It was all he ever wanted for his students. If Naruto could only find it far from here, Guy could not find it in his heart to stand in his students' way. Guy's failure was not Naruto's burden to bear. It was on Guy for not giving him a reason to stay. He had tried for 4 years and still failed. He could not fault his student for seeking his own happiness. His team would be making their last-minute preparations for the exams right now. He knew they would be fine. He needed to find Kakashi. His rival had avoided him for too long and now Guy knew why. He was not about to let his rival suffer alone a moment longer. He didn't know how long he had been sitting here. He'd stopped feeling the effect of the elements a while ago and he hadn't seen anyone for longer than that. He wondered how Sasuke and Sakura were doing, but the thought wasn't enough to move him. They would be fine, better off without him. He had failed completely and utterly as a teacher and his students knew it. Naruto had defected. Sasuke had covered for him. Sakura felt like she was ignored and disregarded. His failures piled up one after the other and Kakashi was drowning in them. He never should have taken them on as a team. He had destroyed his own team as a student, now he had destroyed another as a teacher. He couldn't even look at the memorial stone where teacher and teammates' names were carved into the smooth surface without bile rising in his throat. He knew he hadn't been suitable for teaching, but he'd done it anyway, and now they were here. 3 genin irrevocably changed and their trust broken. Kakashi knew what a team falling apart did to a person, and now he had inflicted it on his own students. He wasn't even allowed to track Naruto down himself, not that he knew what he would do if he found him. He wanted to speak to his student, find out where things had gone so wrong, fucking apologize, but he didn't know if he would be capable of bringing his student back to the village. He knew once Naruto entered those village gates he would never be allowed outside of them again, and Kakashi knew the kid well enough to know that was a sentence worse than death for the Uzumaki. What would he even be bringing him back for? The team was broken and Kakashi a failure as a teacher. He could honestly say that Naruto would not be better off back on Team 7. He needs to transfer the other two to other teams. He would not be their teacher any longer. They deserved a sensei that knew what they were doing and, more importantly, one that didn't ruin everything they touched. Sasuke would be fine as long as he was put with someone strong to teach him. Sakura would take it harder, but she had been more attached to the idea of a team. She would probably feel betrayed, like she'd been swept aside once again without consideration, but Kakashi knew that she would understand eventually. This would be the best thing for the both of them. He would go back to Anbu. It was where he belonged. It was where he could be the most use for his village while doing the least amount of damage. He knew his friends would not be happy with him, especially Guy with how long they'd fought to get him out, but this was his life. They hadn't fucked up like he had, they didn't understand this was for the best. He felt the bile rise at the thought of Guy. He had managed to avoid the other Junin since returning to the village. He couldn't face him. He knew how much Guy loved Naruto. This wouldn't have happened if Naruto was still Guy's student. Kakashi. No. Kakashi, you cannot blame yourself. He couldn't do this. Kakashi. He wouldn't be able to escape. Guy was fast and Kakashi's limbs were stiff. The fuck I can't, he finally replied, voice hoarse. Naruto has always been an independent spirit. You cannot assume responsibility for his choices. Like you haven't. Guy did not reply. It was the quietest he'd ever heard Guy, and it somehow made it all worse. He wished he'd yell at him. Naruto has always planned to leave. Kakashi swallowed, his throat dry. Guy walked over and sat himself next to Kakashi, crossing his legs with his back straight. He barely recognized him like this. Naruto's dream was to leave Konoha, Guy continued. I am sure you are aware of his attempts in his youth. He wished to become strong enough to reach Sannin status so he could do it legally. He knew Naruto hated Konoha, that he took every opportunity to leave when he could. He hadn't known the Sannin bit though. Where was Guy going with this? I tried to give him a reason to stay. Guy's deep voice was subdued. I failed in that. You were probably the only reason he stayed as long as he did. Kakashi scoffed, looking away to stare into the trees. He never would have left if he stayed with you. We cannot know that. I can. Kakashi snapped. Don't fucking patronize me. This was my fault. He was under my care, under my watch, in foreign territory. He slipped away under my nose. You are too hard on yourself, my rival. Kakashi scoffed. He didn't know why Guy wasn't being harder on him. Guy had always been stupidly optimistic and forgiving, and it was not fucking helpful. Kakashi knew he had failed, and Guy pretending he hadn't was making it even worse. I failed him, Guy. I failed him and Sasuke and Sakura, and I was never cut out to be a teacher. He is more than your student. That stopped Kakashi short. What? He would never express his sentiments out loud and he kept his emotions to himself, but Naruto was mine for 3 years. I know my student, Kakashi. His heart is guarded more closely than the daimyo, but he allowed you as close as he was able. Those years you spent as his tutor did not suddenly vanish. What the fuck was he even talking about? There were things he would talk to you about that he would not mention to me. He trusted you. I do not believe that has changed. Guy, he left. Kakashi finally turned back to his friend, meeting grim dark eyes. He chose to become a criminal over being on my team. It was not about you. That stopped Kakashi short. Guy crossed his arms, looking the most grave Kakashi had ever seen him. There was nothing of the happy, youthful man that Kakashi knew. It was very seldom that Guy was serious like this. Kakashi could count the number of times on his hands with fingers to spare. Naruto leaving was not about you. You are not the sole reason for his defection. Naruto has been failed by this village his entire life, and we were not enough to overcome that. That failure is on us, but Naruto leaving? You cannot take that choice away from him by assuming responsibility for it. Guy sighed heavily. How much had he been thinking about this? I've never heard you say anything against the village before. Kakashi couldn't help but comment, still processing Guy's words. I always believed they would see what I see. A wonderful student. The best I have ever trained. He is hardworking, diligent, faces everything head-on and never holds himself back. He would have been the best the village has ever seen. He is kind and honest, and if you are fortunate to be allowed past his guard, a wonderful person who cares with his whole heart even if he struggled to show it. Guy shook his head. We did what we could, he continued. We loved him and supported him and gave him room to be himself without judgment, but it was not enough. We failed, yes, but Naruto has been let down for longer than we have been in his life. We just were not enough. He hadn't been expecting this from Guy. He knew his friend was clever and observant, a fact many people overlooked due to Guy's personality and way of expressing himself, but the man was an elite Junin. You did not get to that rank by strength alone. Kakashi had known him too long to be fooled like the others, but it still caught him off guard occasionally. You don't want them to bring him back. It wasn't a question, do you? Kakashi's silence was answer enough. Wherever he may be, I hope for his happiness, Guy smiled, the ghost of his usual enthusiasm emerging. I hope he is finally able to be free and immerse himself fully into the springtime of his youth. I have no doubt he will shine brightly no matter where he is. Kakashi still didn't think he was teacher material. He still fully intended to transfer his team out and reapply to Anbu. The weight of Naruto leaving still sat heavily on his heart and the guilt still churned a storm in his gut. He didn't know how Guy could still find the positives in this situation. He won't be able to evade the Anbu forever, Kakashi pointed out. Jiraiya will find him too. Whatever happiness is temporary, and when he gets dragged back, things are going to be even worse for him. And if that happens, we will be here for him, Guy said as if it was most simple thing in the world. We will show him that we are still here and we always will be. His friend finally stood. When is the last time you had a meal? I'm fine. That is not what I asked. I'm fine, Guy. Eggplant soup it is. I will return shortly, my rival. Guy vanished and Kakashi sighed. He could leave to escape, but he knew Guy would just track him down again. The other Junin had been there for the entirety of the shitshow that was Kakashi losing his team, and as much as he'd tried to ditch the older man during his time in Anbu, Guy had always turned up with a smile and a challenge. Guy had seen him at his lowest and never looked away. This may be a new low for Kakashi, but Guy would never waver. He didn't know why he bothered with Kakashi. He certainly didn't return the favor. He finally looked at the memorial stone. I'm sorry, Minato-sensei. I failed your son. Silence was the only answer. Naruto bounced through the streets, using his bloodline limit to avoid any collisions on the narrow streets. It wasn't the same as training, but it was nice to stretch it a little. He couldn't use chakra or anything that might give him away as a shinobi, but nobody ever noticed his eye. He already had to run at a normal civilian speed and couldn't water walk on the canals or use his tree walking to navigate the rooftops, so he had to use something to challenge himself. He wanted to keep developing his bloodline limit, and this was one way to make sure he didn't get rusty. It had been one blissful month since he'd escaped from the land of waves, and although it hadn't been long since he'd settled in the capital, Naruto found that the lightness and joy he'd felt on arriving hadn't faded in the slightest. He'd managed to find room and board in exchange for courier services. It was less than he'd earn on a D rank per package or letter, and he lost most of it for his room and board, but Naruto didn't care. If anything, working for an asshole who was taking advantage of kids with nowhere else to go worked to his advantage because it was much more likely to be kept on the down low, which was perfect for him. He had somewhere to sleep and he scavenged enough to eat, and he had something to not only keep him active but let him get to know the city. It was way bigger than he'd first suspected on his arrival. The whole place was organized in concentric circles with canals separating the streets and running through the entire city. The closer to the center of the city, the higher the ground became, like a man-made mountain. At the peak was the daimyo's residence, decorated in gaudy fountains and white metal fencing. The buildings in the city itself were tall, with the majority a light beige and at least 5 stories high, topped with rounded red roofs. Unlike Konoha, which tended towards sprawling, low-level complexes, the capital was condensed with buildings that were thin but tall to fit them all in. The streets and buildings were so bright and clean. Konoha was well developed, but it retained some of the elements of the natural world that surrounded it. This place was designed to be sleek. It made sense with all the rain. It was like things were built for water to slide off, draining back into the canals. Tall white walls surrounded the city, with smaller buildings and residences on the rougher ground outside. They still had the canals, but they lacked the clean, white stone pathways that ran throughout the rest of the city, instead using well-worn dirt paths and misshapen wooden bridges. There was free traffic between these buildings and the others beyond the wall, but the divide was quite clear. Naruto lived in the poorest of the city and he honestly preferred it. The city itself was a little too nice for him to be comfortable with, but he sucked it up for his job. He would probably be able to do the courier runs in a third of the time if he used chakra, but it was fine. It had become apparent he was still one of the quickest on the job, and so he was given the deliveries that required the most groundwork. He didn't speak to any of the other kids, though some had attempted to speak to him a little, and the geezer that hired them had no interest beyond barking orders. He was left alone and it was fantastic. Everyone had gotten the message, so they all ignored him back at the house other than to give him his portion of breakfast and dinner. It wasn't like back in Konoha where they ignored him with malicious intent. They just ignored him because they had their own problems or they didn't have time for him. It was what he'd always wanted. No one picked a fight with him either, because that was a one-way ticket to being chucked out for causing trouble, and no one could afford that. Even in the city itself, it was like he was a part of the scenery. No one looked at the couriers or the gondola drivers or any of the workers that kept the city ticking over. They were just there, and even the people Naruto delivered to barely looked at him, much less thanked him. He was having the time of his life. He'd even managed to scrape together enough money to get a waterproof poncho. He kept his nondescript clothing that he'd initially brought, but after 2 soggy days of delivery he'd decided he'd had enough. It was a boring brown, with a couple of holes, and had obviously been well worn before he'd gotten his hands on it, but it was light and kept him dry. The bucket hat he'd stolen from Tazuna hid the blonde hair that was already starting to grow back. He'd have to cut it off again soon. He would have to figure out a better idea to cover the whisker marks on his cheeks. He was running out of sunscreen, and dirt may not go over well with some of the clients. Something to think about. He was starting to get used to his fake name, Riku, at least. He was not naive enough to believe Konoha wouldn't be on his trail, just waiting to drag him back to the village and lock him up. He'd kept an ear out for any mention of his home village and his deliveries to the city guards, which he was pretty certain were bribes but was none of his damn business, had given no indication that people from the Land of Fire had entered the city limits. Anbu wouldn't exactly announce their presence, and Naruto doubted he'd be able to pick them out a crowd, but it wasn't exactly risk-free. The Land of Water was barely recovering from the recent civil war, and shinobi from other countries were not exactly welcome. He'd heard enough stories during his time in the city to know that if word got out that Konoha shinobi had entered the capital of the Land of Water, the home of the daimyo, there would be uproar. If they did find him, if he could get the attention of anyone, it would at least Konoha some trouble. He sure as shit wasn't going to go quietly. He knew he couldn't stay forever, but he could enjoy it while it lasted. He's earned a little peace. Brown eyes looked up at the tall white walls. It had taken longer to get here than he would have liked, but he was here now. He'd beaten the Anbu at the very least, and despite how annoyed he was with the whole thing, he had to give Minato's brat credit. He'd planned this out well and had managed to stay hidden longer than any of them had expected. It wasn't enough though. Very few people could escape his information network, certainly not a genin. It was an admirable attempt, but he couldn't help but think that the measly month the kid had managed to squeeze was hardly going to be worth the punishment back in Konoha. Sarutobi-sensei had already informed him that the training trip he had planned for the brat may not be possible. The kid was one step away from being locked up, and Jiraiya was one of the few things standing in the way of that. The kid had to learn how to use the Kyuubi's chakra, and he could hardly do that from a cell. It was a waste of his potential and a dishonor to Minato. What was the point of this? Why had Minato's brat fled the village? All he remembered of his godson was a happy, gurgling baby in the wake of the Kyuubi attack. He knew he hadn't exactly hung around, but it was hard to imagine a kid of Minato and Kushina committing treason like this. He would get the answers before he took him back to Konoha. Jiraiya entered the capital of the Land of Water. Chapter 27. Naruto knocked on the door. Delivery for Sato-san. There was some rustling behind the door before it swung open and a half-naked man appeared. He stank of sweat and his bald head reflected the overhead light. It was obvious that he had just barely managed to shove on some underwear before answering the door, a dark scowl on his face. "Shut it, brat, not so loud," he demanded, trying and failing to sound threatening. Naruto had encountered academy students more dangerous than this man. How did you find me here? Not my problem, Naruto shrugged, holding out the envelope. I go where I'm told. He ignored the female voice calling Sato back to bed. He didn't care enough to figure why exactly Sato was so sensitive to being found. Sato snarled, but he did snatch it from him. Naruto rolled his eyes as he next held out the ink pad and receipt. Print here. Sato shoved his meaty thumb into the ink and pressed his thumb to the receipt, smudging it beyond recognition. Naruto didn't particularly care. He delivered it and he had proof. It wasn't his fault the client was a mess. The door slammed abruptly in his face and Naruto sighed. He reminded himself it was still not as bad as Konoha. The thought helped. Uzumaki Naruto. He snapped around, breath catching in his throat. No one here should know that name. He hadn't uttered it once since leaving the land of waves, only using Riku. Had Konoha found him? Shit, his reaction had given away so he couldn't even bluff his way out of anything. His gaze caught on two men at the end of the hallway. Both wore black cloaks decorated in red clouds and they were closed from the top of their shinobi sandals to their noses, hiding the clothing beneath. The taller one had blue skin with what looked like gills beneath each of his eyes. Pale blue eyes watched him from beneath a kirihite that had been scratched out, holding spiky black hair out of his face. The shorter one looked like Sasuke, way too much like Sasuke. He had the same pale skin and sleek black hair, although it hung around this guy's face longer than it did on Sasuke's. His Konoha Hite was scored out. Red eyes stared back at him and Naruto swallowed. This had to be Itachi. Why the fuck was Sasuke's brother here? Why was he looking for Naruto? Itachi, he couldn't help but say, tensing as the guy's eyes narrowed slightly. You are familiar with me? I've heard stories. They didn't move. What do you want? Naruto continued, eyes darting between them as he figured out exit routes. You can't be here to bring me back to Konoha. You are correct. Itachi walked towards him, stopping a couple of steps away. Naruto had to figure something out soon. You will come with us. Naruto's eyes widened. It would be a pain in the neck if this kid moves around. The taller man's deep voice cut in, moving one hand to grasp the giant sword handle that had been peeking over his shoulder. Maybe I should cut off a leg just in case. Naruto took a step back. What the fuck? What the fuck? He'd been expecting Konoha, but he had not expected two random missing nin whom he had never even met before. What did they want with him? Why him? He wasn't bothering anymore here and they weren't with any village that he could tell. The blue guy started to draw his sword off his back and Naruto another step back. How could he get out of this? He brought up his hand to summon clones but nothing happened. Nothing happened. He couldn't even feel his chakra right now. My sword, Sharkskin, has the ability to cut through and eat chakra, the man announced. It's a pain in the ass if you move around and use jutsu like that. Oh shit. What the fuck do you shitheads even want? Naruto howled, furious. All that planning, all this time as a civilian, all that freedom, and it was going to be taken away from him because of these guys? Not even Konoha? What the fuck have I ever done to you? Foul-mouthed little shit. It is not a matter of what you have done, Itachi answered. It is a matter of what you have. Naruto didn't have time to puzzle that out before there was a pop, and white smoke began to fill the narrow hallway. He looked up to see the back of an orange toad. It had blue flame-like markings across its skin and wore shoulder bracers as armor. It stood several inches taller than Naruto, having to crane his neck to look at the back of its head. What? The blue demanded, echoing Naruto's thoughts. You guys do not know me much, do you? A deep voice spoke from behind him. You thought you could get past me to the brat so easily? Naruto looked behind to see a mountain of a man standing next to him. He was dressed in an olive green loose shirt and pants, with a bright red haori over it that had two yellow spots on his chest. Black mesh bracers covered his wrists and he wore gray knuckle dusters on his hands. Spiky white hair framed his face, hanging to his collarbones with the rest tied up into a high ponytail that fell to his hips. A red line ran down from each eye straight to his chin and his horned metal hite just read, oil. Who the fuck was this? Another missing nin? The door beside them opened and Sato poked his head out, furious. What the hell are you doing out here? He yelled. How dare you disturb? Naruto saw the moment he realized what exactly was happening as all three powerful shinobi turned to look at the man. Sato squeaked and the door slammed shut, panicked yelling emerging from the wooden surface. You are, after all, Master Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, the blue bastard interrupted, drawing their gazes. I did not believe that you would be so easy to subvert. Sannin? This old guy was one of the Sannin? Would Konoha really send one of the Sannin to bring him back? Shit, now his enemies here had doubled. How is he going to get away? To abduct Naruto is the #1 priority placed by our organization, Akatsuki, Itachi added. The Kyuubi is destined to be ours. Naruto's hand unconsciously rose to touch his stomach. They were after the Kyuubi? As if the damned fox had been causing him enough trouble in his life. I can't let you have Naruto, Jiraiya stated firmly. This is perfect. I'll get rid of both of you right here. The brat isn't even a Konoha shinobi anymore, the blue bastard replied. He is a missing nin. Don't butt in, Naruto growled. It itched at him that someone from Konoha was helping him, but there was nothing he could do about it. He was too weak to take these guys on by himself. He fucking hated it. He cursed as the walls started to change to a weird fleshy color, the meat crawling over the walls until they were surrounded on all sides. Kachiyose. Gamaguchi Shibari. Itachi and his partner started to get sucked into the walls and Naruto could only watch in disbelief. How unfortunate, Itachi, Kisame, Jiraiya said, grinning. You guys are already inside my stomach. The fuck is this? Naruto yelled, the floor squelching beneath his feet. Stay still, brat. The newly named Kisame tore his sword from the floor with a shower of blood as he and Itachi began to run in the opposite direction. Jiraiya knelt to the ground and pressed both his palms down, the floor soon starting to move and constrict around them. Thick strands of flesh broke out of the walls and tore towards the retreating pair, Kisame fending them off with his sword. Naruto lost sight of them, Jiraiya racing past him. Naruto tore off after him, soon coming to an opening in the fleshy wall. Black flames flickered around the new entrance, starting to spread slowly down the hall. Don't get close. Wasn't planning on it, geezer. Jiraiya placed a giant scroll on the ground and rolled it out, rapidly running through hand signs. Fuka Hoin. The black flames vanished around them and Naruto took his chance. He lunged for the opening, choking as something caught the back of his shirt. Not so fast, brat, the Sannin said, unimpressed. We've got to talk. Jiraiya set the kid down in front of him, having finally reached an area devoid of people. He hadn't expected the brat to be in danger so soon. It was very bad news that the Akatsuki had managed to catch up to the kid before he did. He was lucky Jiraiya was already watching him. I didn't need your help. The kid scowled up at him and Jiraiya couldn't help but find the parts of Minato and Kushina in him. He was covered in dirt and sunscreen which covered most of his identifiable features, but those blue eyes were all Minato, same as his round face was all Kushina. The ugly bucket hat hid what Jiraiya knew would be blonde spiky hair that the kid had hacked away at with a kunai. He was underweight and short for his age. You're welcome, brat, he scoffed. What the fuck do you want? The kid's face was still twisted into an ugly scowl, blue eyes stormy. How had this grumpy brat come from Minato and Kushina? I came to save your ass, you ungrateful little shit, he snapped back. Watch the language. Eat shit and die, old man. Jiraiya's eye twitched. Do not hit the child. It's time for you to go home, brat. Jiraiya didn't think it was possible for the brat's expression to sour further. He was quickly proven wrong as murderous intent flooded out of the boy. Over your dead body. You really think you could put a scratch on me, brat? You're 100 years too early to challenge the great Jiraiya. He grabbed the kid's arm before he could take off. Ignoring Jiraiya's wonderful speech, he really was an insolent little brat. He plucked the kunai that tried to make its way into his eye out of the kid's hand, knocking away the other from his private area. This kid was fucking feral. Calm down. Fuck you. I'm not going back. Jiraiya dropped him and the kid just barely landed on his feet, still shooting an evil look at Jiraiya. It's not safe for you to be out of the village on your own. Jiraiya tried to reason, still resisting the urge to hit the brat quite gallantly, he'd like to add. People are after you, people like Itachi and Kisame, and they are not going to stop. I don't care. Naruto crossed his arms, seeming to realize he was not going to get far. I'd rather die fighting out here than suffocate there. Jiraiya frowned. What happened in Konoha, kid? Why don't you want to go back? None of your fucking business. The kid was less cooperative than a fucking wall. It was not what he expected on meeting his godson. Is it really worth your life? Yes. They stared at each other, unwilling to back down. There was something Jiraiya was missing here. He knew Jinchuriki were often mistreated, but Sarutobi-sensei wouldn't have let that happen. There had to be something else. Well, unless you can beat me, you don't have a choice in the matter. Jiraiya crossed his arms. He would wait until the brat calmed down before telling him about their connection. He had a feeling the training trip would not be well received right now either. He had to get the brat back to Konoha and figure out what happened in his absence. If I go back, I'll never be allowed out again. Naruto yelled, rage palpable in the air around him. They'll lock me up and throw away the key. You're being a little dramatic, brat. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. You should have thought about this before you ran off. Naruto snarled, the words unintelligible around the clenching of his teeth. This was one angry kid. Jiraiya thought he might be a little grateful that he'd saved him from Itachi and Kisame, but apparently not. The brat needed to learn some manners. The kid darted out of the way of Jiraiya's hand, but they both knew the Sannin had allowed it. The brat was stuck and he knew it. Naruto stopped, staring Jiraiya dead in the eye. The change was unnerving. If you take me back, Naruto began, his expression unreadable. I will release the Kyuubi and they will destroy the village. A drop of ice slid down Jiraiya's spine. Quit joking, brat. I'm not. You don't know what you're saying. He didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't know the destruction of a tailed beast. He didn't know. I'm the one who has been carrying them around for 12 years. I know enough. A moment of silence. It would kill you. I know. It would be worth it if I could take Konoha down with me. The brat was serious. The kid was dead fucking serious. Jiraiya could see it in his eyes. What the fuck? I could stop you. Yeah, Naruto shrugged. You can't be there all the time though. If you take me back to Konoha, I swear on every fucking god out there I will release the Kyuubi, and let me tell you, the demon has a bone to pick with your village. You won't be able to save them all. What the fuck is wrong with you? Naruto shrugged, smiling for the first time that Jiraiya had seen. It was not a nice smile. I am what they made me. He bared his teeth. They always thought I was evil and would destroy the village one day. I could finally prove them right. They'll be thrilled. Jiraiya did not like the implications of that. Naruto had relaxed slightly and Jiraiya could tell the brat had thought he'd won. He didn't know what to do here. This couldn't be his godson. This could not be Minato and Kushina's child. Well, Naruto crossed his arms, waiting. I don't respond well to threats, brat. And I don't respond well to being dragged back to Konoha, he snarked. Looks like we both get to be fucking inconvenienced. Another moment of silence. I can seal the beast away so even you can't touch it. Naruto's smile dropped, his blue eyes cold. Then I would have to do it the old-fashioned way. You aren't nearly strong enough for that. Let me be clear, Jiraiya of the fucking Sannin, Naruto said slowly, walking over and poking him in the chest. If you bring me back to Konoha, even if I can't release the Kyuubi, I will kill every civilian I can get my hands on. I don't care about dying if I can hurt Konoha along the way, not anymore. I've tasted freedom and I would rather burn down the village with my bare hands than go back to the way it was before. There was something broken in this kid's head. You can be locked up for the rest of your life, Jiraiya replied. You would spend the rest of your life locked up and away from anyone you can hurt. What's the plan here, kid? You know you can't fight this. Anger seeped back in Naruto's features. I have been fighting every single fucking day of my life. I don't care what measures you take or what you. I swear on the Yondaime's name I will figure it out. Hearing that name was like a punch in the gut. Don't use his name like that, he couldn't help but snap. He's my old man, isn't he? Naruto sneered and shit, when did he find out? I'll even kill everyone in his name. Really liven up the family name. Jiraiya punched the kid before he could stop himself. Naruto was knocked to the ground with a thud, lifting a hand to press at the blood on his lip. He grinned up at Jiraiya, the blood smearing on his teeth. Got you. Jiraiya was breathing heavily. What the fuck was wrong with this kid? What the fuck was wrong with this kid? You'll travel with me for now. He barely managed to get out. We need to go get your stuff. No Konoha? Jiraiya fucking hated this. No Konoha, for now. The kid bounced up. Good enough for now, I guess. The kid turned to lead the way and Jiraiya followed, staring at the back of the kid's head. He need time to think. This conversation had taken a turn he never would have expected in a million years and he needed time to process. He needed to send a message to Sarutobi-sama to call the Anbu off the search, and if he demanded to know more about his godson, he damned well deserved to know. Sasuke couldn't even enjoy the blaze, frowning as the fire from his jutsu slowly spread through the tree, leaves crumbling to ash and branches turning black. He should probably stop it before it jumped to the surrounding tress. Konoha unsurprisingly frowned on forest fires. He couldn't find it in himself to care. The first part of the Chunin exams was finished and they had a month before the next portion. Sasuke didn't know if he would go and watch. He didn't know if he would be able to sit there and just watch, knowing he could easily kick the ass of anyone there. He should be training for the final component of the exam, but no, he was in an abandoned training ground watching trees burn down. It was getting harder and harder every day to remember why he wanted to stay in the village instead of going with Naruto. Kakashi was still a fucking ghost, and the coward hadn't even bothered to show up when Sasuke had been summoned to the mission assignment desk with Sakura to find out they'd been transferred to new genin teams. Sakura had tried to speak to him about it, but Sasuke had quickly made himself scarce. He didn't even know who his new Junin sensei was meant to be, and he didn't care. He was not going to get trapped into another genin team, especially not one that would hold him back even further. Team 7 had only been bearable because Naruto had been there. You're not going to beat Itachi by staying in the village. Naruto's words haunted him. His reasoning for disagreeing with the blonde felt flimsy now. Kakashi had pawned them off onto other genin teams. His research into any other strong Junin in the village was coming up empty. They either were always out on missions or they already had teams of their own. He had exhausted the jutsu in the library that he could access, and even his status as an uchiha hadn't allowed him to access the Chunin level, and higher jutsu and security had been increased with all the foreign nin in the village. Every reason he had given himself for staying, and all he was left with was regret that he hadn't just taken that leap and gone with Naruto. It was still true that they wouldn't have teachers or jutsu scrolls out there on their own, and they would have Anbu hunting them down, and money would be scarce and every other thing Sasuke could think of, but it had to be better than here. It would at least challenge him, and he could adapt and overcome and survive and feel like he was moving forward. Training hard again, Sasuke-kun? Sasuke scowled as he turned to look at the genin from a couple weeks ago. He looked the same as he had last time he came to bother Sasuke, a mild look on his stupid face. It's a shame that you don't have a teacher that can help, the guy continued. Sasuke thought his name was Yakusha? Yukashi? Whatever, it wasn't important. I heard about your transfer. You're a nosy bastard, Sasuke growled as he considered aiming his next Kaiden jutsu at the genin. I was just wondering if you had thought about my offer? About a new teacher for you? To be honest, Sasuke hadn't thought about this guy once since he'd last seen him, but his reappearance drudged up the memory from him. Yakushi was his name, he finally recalled. Where would you find a teacher like this? He humored him. Yakushi smiled. Sasuke didn't like it. This whole thing felt off, but he was more desperate than he was 2 weeks ago. My sensei has been interested in your potential for a while. Yakushi stepped closer. He thinks it's a shame a talent like you is being held back like this. He wants to help. Sasuke could hear the slime curling around Yakushi's words. This idiot thought he could manipulate Sasuke, but he would allow it for now. He had vowed he would do whatever it took to get stronger than Itachi, and if that meant humoring this guy's attempts to lure Sasuke into a trap, Sasuke would do it. He could just kill the guy if it went south. Who is he? Yakushi paused. Let's just say he's not a fan of Konoha. Not good enough. Sasuke crossed his arms. It's obvious that this teacher is not in the village. I'm willing to bet he's a missing nin or something. If I'm going to ditch the village, I want to know if it's worth my time. The pleasant smile dropped from Yakushi's face and a cold, considering look replaced it. It was about time this guy started showing his true colors. Sasuke didn't like fucking about with fake pleasantries or sucking up. It was why he spent so much around Naruto. To be expected from you, Sasuke-kun. The smile this time was sharp. It is Orochimaru of the Sannin. I am sure you have heard of his strength. Sasuke had not been expecting that. He knew of the Sannin, the man having fled the village after being ousted for some illegal shit way back when. He didn't know much more than that, having had very little interest, but they learned of the feats of the Sannin during the wars back in the academy. This was a man on par with the Hokage himself. What's to stop me from reporting you? He asked, curious. I doubt Konoha would be happy that Orochimaru had a serving boy in the village trying to recruit people. It was reminiscent of when he'd asked Naruto something very similar, when the blonde had revealed his plans to him for leaving. He wasn't actually going to do it, he didn't owe anything to Konoha after all. I'm only here for you, Yakushi replied evenly. I can't stop you from reporting me, but I feel like you know that I have the better offer. Do you want to become strong, Uchiha Sasuke? Or do you want to be a good little Konoha soldier? He did not appreciate the condescension, but he knew that wouldn't change his answer. It wasn't as if there was anything left to keep him here. He needed to get stronger to defeat Itachi, and it had become glaringly obvious that would not happen if he stayed in Konoha. He could imagine Naruto's delighted expression at his decision. He was still going to punch the Dobi when he saw him next. When do we leave? Yakushi's satisfied grin almost annoyed Sasuke enough to spite him, but he refrained. He had chosen his path and he would stick to it. He had to defeat Itachi, and to do that, he had to become much, much stronger. Nothing else mattered. Naruto knocked on the door. Delivery for Sato-san. There was some rustling behind the door before it swung open and a half-naked man appeared. He stank of sweat and his bald head reflected the overhead light. It was obvious that he had just barely managed to shove on some underwear before answering the door, a dark scowl on his face. "Shut it, brat, not so loud," he demanded, trying and failing to sound threatening. Naruto had encountered academy students more dangerous than this man. "How did you find me here?" "Not my problem," Naruto shrugged, holding out the envelope. "I go where I'm told." He ignored the female voice calling Sato back to bed. He didn't care enough to figure why exactly Sato was so sensitive to being found. Sato snarled, but he did snatch it from him. Naruto rolled his eyes as he next held out the ink pad and receipt. "Print here." Sato shoved his meaty thumb into the ink and pressed his thumb to the receipt, smudging it beyond recognition. Naruto didn't particularly care. He delivered it and he had proof. It wasn't his fault the client was a mess. The door slammed abruptly in his face and Naruto sighed. He reminded himself it was still not as bad as Konoha. The thought helped. Uzumaki Naruto. He snapped around, breath catching in his throat. No one here should know that name. He hadn't uttered it once since leaving the Land of Waves, only using Riku. Had Konoha found him? Shit, his reaction had given away, so he couldn't even bluff his way out of anything. His gaze caught on two men at the end of the hallway. Both wore black cloaks decorated in red clouds, and they were closed from the top of their shinobi sandals to their noses, hiding the clothing beneath. The taller one had blue skin with what looked like gills beneath each of his eyes. Pale blue eyes watched him from beneath a kiri-hite that had been scratched out, holding spiky black hair out of his face. The shorter one looked like Sasuke, way too much like Sasuke. He had the same pale skin and sleek black hair, although it hung around this guy's face longer than it did on Sasuke's. His Konoha Hite was scored out. Red eyes stared back at him and Naruto swallowed. This had to be Itachi. Why the fuck was Sasuke's brother here? Why was he looking for Naruto? Itachi, he couldn't help but say, tensing as the guy's eyes narrowed slightly. "You are familiar with me? I've heard stories." They didn't move. "What do you want?" Naruto continued, eyes darting between them as he figured out exit routes. "You can't be here to bring me back to Konoha." "You are correct." Itachi walked towards him, stopping a couple of steps away. Naruto had to figure something out soon. "You will come with us." Naruto's eyes widened. "It would be a pain in the neck if this kid moves around." The taller man's deep voice cut in, moving one hand to grasp the giant sword handle that had been peeking over his shoulder. "Maybe I should cut off a leg just in case." Naruto took a step back. What the fuck? What the fuck? He'd been expecting Konoha, but he had not expected two random missing nin whom he had never even met before. What did they want with him? Why him? He wasn't bothering anymore here, and they weren't with any village that he could tell. The blue guy started to draw his sword off his back and Naruto another step back. How could he get out of this? He brought up his hand to summon clones, but nothing happened. Nothing happened. He couldn't even feel his chakra right now. "My sword, Sharkskin, has the ability to cut through and eat chakra," the man announced. "It's a pain in the ass if you move around and use jutsu like that." "Oh shit. What the fuck do you shitheads even want?" Naruto howled, furious. All that planning, all this time as a civilian, all that freedom, and it was going to be taken away from him because of these guys? Not even Konoha? What the fuck have I ever done to you? Foul-mouthed little shit. It is not a matter of what you have done, Itachi answered. It is a matter of what you have. Naruto didn't have time to puzzle that out before there was a pop, and white smoke began to fill the narrow hallway. He looked up to see the back of an orange toad. It had blue flame-like markings across its skin and wore shoulder bracers as armor. It stood several inches taller than Naruto, having to crane his neck to look at the back of its head. What? The blue demanded, echoing Naruto's thoughts. You guys do not know me much, do you? A deep voice spoke from behind him. You thought you could get past me to the brat so easily? Naruto looked behind to see a mountain of a man standing next to him. He was dressed in an olive green loose shirt and pants, with a bright red haori over it that had 2 yellow spots on his chest. Black mesh bracers covered his wrists and he wore gray knuckle dusters on his hands. Spiky white hair framed his face, hanging to his collarbones with the rest tied up into a high ponytail that fell to his hips. A red line ran down from each eye straight to his chin and his horned metal hite ate just red oil. Who the fuck was this? Another missing nin? The door beside them opened and Sato poked his head out, furious. What the hell are you doing out here? He yelled. How dare you disturb? Naruto saw the moment he realized what exactly was happening as all 3 powerful shinobi turned to look at the man. Sato squeaked and the door slammed shut, panicked yelling emerging from the wooden surface. You are, after all, Master Jiraiya, one of the legendary Sannin, the blue bastard interrupted, drawing their gazes. I did not believe that you would be so easy to subvert. Sannin? This old guy was one of the Sannin? Would Konoha really send one of the Sannin to bring him back? Shit, now his enemies here had doubled. How is he going to get away? To abduct Naruto is the #1 priority placed by our organization, Akatsuki, Itachi added. The Kyuubi is destined to be ours. Naruto's hand unconsciously rose to touch his stomach. They were after the Kyuubi? As if the damned fox had been causing him enough trouble in his life. I can't let you have Naruto, Jiraiya stated firmly. This is perfect. I'll get rid of both of you right here. The brat isn't even a Konoha shinobi anymore, the blue bastard replied. He is a missing nin. Don't butt in, Naruto growled. It itched at him that someone from Konoha was helping him but there was nothing he could do about it. He was too weak to take these guys on by himself. He fucking hated it. He cursed as the walls started to change to a weird fleshy color, the meat crawling over the walls until they were surrounded on all sides. Kachiyose. Gamaguchi Shibari. Itachi and his partner started to get sucked into the walls and Naruto could only watch in disbelief. How unfortunate, Itachi, Kisame, Jiraiya said, grinning. You guys are already inside my stomach. The fuck is this? Naruto yelled, the floor squelching beneath his feet. Stay still, brat. The newly named Kisame tore his sword from the floor with a shower of blood as he and Itachi began to run in the opposite direction. Jiraiya knelt to the ground and pressed both his palms down, the floor soon starting to move and constrict around them. Thick strands of flesh broke out of the walls and tore towards the retreating pair, Kisame fending them off with his sword. Naruto lost sight of them, Jiraiya racing past him. Naruto tore off after him, soon coming to an opening in the fleshy wall. Black flames flickered around the new entrance, starting to spread slowly down the hall. Don't get close. Wasn't planning on it, geezer. Jiraiya placed a giant scroll on the ground and rolled it out, rapidly running through hand signs. Fuka Hoin. The black flames vanished around them and Naruto took his chance. He lunged for the opening, choking as something caught the back of his shirt. Not so fast, brat, the Sannin said, unimpressed. We've got to talk. Jiraiya set the kid down in front of him, having finally reached an area devoid of people. He hadn't expected the brat to be in danger so soon. It was very bad news that the Akatsuki had managed to catch up to the kid before he did. He was lucky Jiraiya was already watching him. I didn't need your help. The kid scowled up at him and Jiraiya couldn't help but find the parts of Minato and Kushina in him. He was covered in dirt and sunscreen which covered most of his identifiable features, but those blue eyes were all Minato, same as his round face was all Kushina. The ugly bucket hat hid what Jiraiya knew would be blonde spiky hair that the kid had hacked away at with a kunai. He was underweight and short for his age. You're welcome, brat, he scoffed. What the fuck do you want? The kid's face was still twisted into an ugly scowl, blue eyes stormy. How had this grumpy brat come from Minato and Kushina? I came to save your ass, you ungrateful little shit, he snapped back. Watch the language. Eat shit and die, old man. Jiraiya's eye twitched. Do not hit the child. It's time for you to go home, brat. Jiraiya didn't think it was possible for the brat's expression to sour further. He was quickly proven wrong as murderous intent flooded out of the boy. Over your dead body. You really think you could put a scratch on me, brat? You're 100 years too early to challenge the great Jiraiya. He grabbed the kid's arm before he could take off. Ignoring Jiraiya's wonderful speech, he really was an insolent little brat. He plucked the kunai that tried to make its way into his eye out of the kid's hand, knocking away the other from his private area. This kid was fucking feral. Calm down. Fuck you. I'm not going back. Jiraiya dropped him and the kid just barely landed on his feet, still shooting an evil look at Jiraiya. It's not safe for you to be out of the village on your own. Jiraiya tried to reason, still resisting the urge to hit the brat quite gallantly. He'd like to add. People are after you, people like Itachi and Kisame, and they are not going to stop. I don't care. Naruto crossed his arms, seeming to realize he was not going to get far. I'd rather die fighting out here than suffocate there. Jiraiya frowned. What happened in Konoha, kid? Why don't you want to go back? None of your fucking business. The kid was less cooperative than a fucking wall. It was not what he expected on meeting his godson. Is it really worth your life? Yes. They stared at each other, unwilling to back down. There was something Jiraiya was missing here. He knew Jinchuriki were often mistreated, but Sarutobi-sensei wouldn't have let that happen. There had to be something else. Well, unless you can beat me, you don't have a choice in the matter. Jiraiya crossed his arms. He would wait until the brat calmed down before telling him about their connection. He had a feeling the training trip would not be well received right now either. He had to get the brat back to Konoha and figure out what happened in his absence. If I go back, I'll never be allowed out again. Naruto yelled, rage palpable in the air around him. They'll lock me up and throw away the key. You're being a little dramatic, brat. Jiraiya rolled his eyes. You should have thought about this before you ran off. Naruto snarled, the words unintelligible around the clenching of his teeth. This was one angry kid. Jiraiya thought he might be a little grateful that he'd saved him from Itachi and Kisame, but apparently not. The brat needed to learn some manners. The kid darted out of the way of Jiraiya's hand, but they both knew the Sannin had allowed it. The brat was stuck and he knew it. Naruto stopped, staring Jiraiya dead in the eye. The change was unnerving. If you take me back, Naruto began, his expression unreadable. I will release the Kyuubi and they will destroy the village. A drop of ice slid down Jiraiya's spine. Quit joking, brat. I'm not. You don't know what you're saying. He didn't know what he was talking about. He didn't know the destruction of a tailed beast. He didn't know. I'm the one who has been carrying them around for 12 years. I know enough. A moment of silence. It would kill you. I know. It would be worth it if I could take Konoha down with me. The brat was serious. The kid was dead fucking serious. Jiraiya could see it in his eyes. What the fuck? I could stop you. Yeah, Naruto shrugged. You can't be there all the time though. If you take me back to Konoha, I swear on every fucking god out there I will release the Kyuubi, and let me tell you, the demon has a bone to pick with your village. You won't be able to save them all. What the fuck is wrong with you? Naruto shrugged, smiling for the first time that Jiraiya had seen. It was not a nice smile. I am what they made me. He bared his teeth. They always thought I was evil and would destroy the village one day. I could finally prove them right. They'll be thrilled. Jiraiya did not like the implications of that. Naruto had relaxed slightly and Jiraiya could tell the brat had thought he'd won. He didn't know what to do here. This couldn't be his godson. This could not be Minato and Kushina's child. Well, Naruto crossed his arms, waiting. I don't respond well to threats, brat. And I don't respond well to being dragged back to Konoha, he snarked. Looks like we both get to be fucking inconvenienced. Another moment of silence. I can seal the beast away so even you can't touch it. Naruto's smile dropped, his blue eyes cold. Then I would have to do it the old-fashioned way. You aren't nearly strong enough for that. Let me be clear, Jiraiya of the fucking Sannin, Naruto said slowly, walking over and poking him in the chest. If you bring me back to Konoha, even if I can't release the Kyuubi, I will kill every civilian I can get my hands on. I don't care about dying if I can hurt Konoha along the way, not anymore. I've tasted freedom and I would rather burn down the village with my bare hands than go back to the way it was before. There was something broken in this kid's head. You can be locked up for the rest of your life, Jiraiya replied. You would spend the rest of your life locked up and away from anyone you can hurt. What's the plan here, kid? You know you can't fight this. Anger seeped back in Naruto's features. I have been fighting every single fucking day of my life. I don't care what measures you take or what you. I swear on the Yondaime's name I will figure it out. Hearing that name was like a punch in the gut. Don't use his name like that, he couldn't help but snap. He's my old man, isn't he? Naruto sneered and shit, when did he find out? I'll even kill everyone in his name. Really liven up the family name. Jiraiya punched the kid before he could stop himself. Naruto was knocked to the ground with a thud, lifting a hand to press at the blood on his lip. He grinned up at Jiraiya, the blood smearing on his teeth. Got you. Jiraiya was breathing heavily. What the fuck was wrong with this kid? What the fuck was wrong with this kid? You'll travel with me for now, he barely managed to get out. We need to go get your stuff. No Konoha? Jiraiya fucking hated this. No Konoha, for now. The kid bounced up. Good enough for now, I guess. The kid turned to lead the way and Jiraiya followed, staring at the back of the kid's head. He need time to think. This conversation had taken a turn he never would have expected in a million years and he needed time to process. He needed to send a message to Sarutobi-sama to call the Anbu off the search, and if he demanded to know more about his godson, he damned well deserved to know. Sasuke couldn't even enjoy the blaze, frowning as the fire from his jutsu slowly spread through the tree, leaves crumbling to ash and branches turning black. He should probably stop it before it jumped to the surrounding tress. Konoha unsurprisingly frowned on forest fires. He couldn't find it in himself to care. The first part of the Chunin exams was finished and they had a month before the next portion. Sasuke didn't know if he would go and watch. He didn't know if he would be able to sit there and just watch, knowing he could easily kick the ass of anyone there. He should be training for the final component of the exam, but no, he was in an abandoned training ground watching trees burn down. It was getting harder and harder every day to remember why he wanted to stay in the village instead of going with Naruto. Kakashi was still a fucking ghost and the coward hadn't even bothered to show up when Sasuke had been summoned to the mission assignment desk with Sakura to find out they'd been transferred to new genin teams. Sakura had tried to speak to him about it, but Sasuke had quickly made himself scarce. He didn't even know who his new Junin sensei was meant to be and he didn't care. He was not going to get trapped into another genin team, especially not one that would hold him back even further. Team 7 had only been bearable because Naruto had been there. You're not going to beat Itachi by staying in the village. Naruto's words haunted him. His reasoning for disagreeing with the blonde felt flimsy now. Kakashi had pawned them off onto other genin teams. His research into any other strong Junin in the village was coming up empty. They either were always out on missions or they already had teams of their own. He had exhausted the jutsu in the library that he could access, and even his status as an uchiha hadn't allowed him to access the Chunin level, and higher jutsu and security had been increased with all the foreign nin in the village. Every reason he had given himself for staying, and all he was left with was regret that he hadn't just taken that leap and gone with Naruto. It was still true that they wouldn't have teachers or jutsu scrolls out there on their own, and they would have Anbu hunting them down, and money would be scarce and every other thing Sasuke could think of, but it had to be better than here. It would at least challenge him and he could adapt and overcome and survive and feel like he was moving forward. Training hard again, Sasuke-kun? Sasuke scowled as he turned to look at the genin from a couple weeks ago. He looked the same as he had last time he came to bother Sasuke, a mild look on his stupid face. It's a shame that you don't have a teacher that can help, the guy continued. Sasuke thought his name was Yakusha? Yukashi? Whatever, it wasn't important. I heard about your transfer. You're a nosy bastard, Sasuke growled as he considered aiming his next Kaiden jutsu at the genin. I was just wondering if you had thought about my offer? About a new teacher for you? To be honest, Sasuke hadn't thought about this guy once since he'd last seen him, but his reappearance drudged up the memory from him. Yakushi was his name, he finally recalled. Where would you find a teacher like this? He humored him. Yakushi smiled. Sasuke didn't like it. This whole thing felt off, but he was more desperate than he was 2 weeks ago. My sensei has been interested in your potential for a while. Yakushi stepped closer. He thinks it's a shame a talent like you is being held back like this. He wants to help. Sasuke could hear the slime curling around Yakushi's words. This idiot thought he could manipulate Sasuke, but he would allow it for now. He had vowed he would do whatever it took to get stronger than Itachi, and if that meant humoring this guy's attempts to lure Sasuke into a trap, Sasuke would do it. He could just kill the guy if it went south. Who is he? Yakushi paused. Let's just say he's not a fan of Konoha. Not good enough. Sasuke crossed his arms. It's obvious that this teacher is not in the village. I'm willing to be bet he's a missing nin or something. If I'm going to ditch the village, I want to know if it's worth my time. The pleasant smile dropped from Yakushi's face and a cold, considering look replaced it. It was about time this guy started showing his true colors. Sasuke didn't like fucking about with fake pleasantries or sucking up. It was why he spent so much around Naruto. To be expected from you, Sasuke-kun. The smile this time was sharp. It is Orochimaru of the Sannin. I am sure you have heard of his strength. Sasuke had not been expecting that. He knew of the Sannin, the man having fled the village after being ousted for some illegal shit way back when. He didn't know much more than that, having had very little interest, but they learned of the feats of the Sannin during the wars back in the academy. This was a man on par with the Hokage himself. What's to stop me from reporting you? He asked, curious. I doubt Konoha would be happy that Orochimaru had a serving boy in the village trying to recruit people. It was reminiscent of when he'd asked Naruto something very similar, when the blonde had revealed his plans to him for leaving. He wasn't actually going to do it. He didn't owe anything to Konoha after all. I'm only here for you, Yakushi replied evenly. I can't stop you from reporting me, but I feel like you know that I have the better offer. Do you want to become strong, Uchiha Sasuke? Or do you want to be a good little Konoha soldier? He did not appreciate the condescension, but he knew that wouldn't change his answer. It wasn't as if there was anything left to keep him here. He needed to get stronger to defeat Itachi, and it had become glaringly obvious that would not happen if he stayed in Konoha. He could imagine Naruto's delighted expression at his decision. He was still going to punch the dobi when he saw him next. When do we leave? Yakushi's satisfied grin almost annoyed Sasuke enough to spite him, but he refrained. He had chosen his path and he would stick to it. He had to defeat Itachi, and to do that, he had to become much, much stronger. Nothing else mattered. Chapter 28. Naruto dragged his feet behind the Sannin, glaring out at the scenery as it slowly passed by. He'd grabbed his stuff and immediately been forced out the capital, Jiraiya stating that they needed to stay on the move. Naruto didn't necessarily disagree with him, but he couldn't help the instinct to do exactly the opposite of whatever the old man told him to do. Naruto did not like people who thought they had any unearned authority over him, and he liked it even less when they tried to order him around. The Kyuubi hadn't been a card he thought of playing before. Normally, he liked to spend his time imagining the tailed beast did not exist. He'd heard rumblings at the back of his mind, but he had become very good at ignoring them. It had not been until the very real risk of Jiraiya dragging him back to Konoha did Naruto realize how far he was willing to go. He didn't want to do it. He didn't want to die. He didn't want to unleash something like that on the very few people he actually liked in the village. His time away from Konoha had impacted him more than he'd expected it to, and the threats had spilled out. They'd been through several villages, and Naruto was starting to get an idea of the man. He was stubborn, childish, and enjoyed riling people up. He acted dumber and weaker than he was, and always chose whichever option was the most over the top or dramatic. If Naruto hadn't seen for himself how strong the man was, he wouldn't have been able to take him seriously. The more he saw the man interact with other people, though, the more Naruto saw that was the goal of the behavior. One thing about him that was definitely not an act was that Jiraiya was a massive pervert. He'd caught the man sneaking off to one of the women's bathhouses after ordering Naruto to stay at the inn, and he'd taken the opportunity to get the hell out of there. Jiraiya had caught him on the outskirts, and it was the most genuinely annoyed he'd seen the man so far. The Sannin had proceeded to go on a rant about research, and not appreciating beauty, and having much to learn. Naruto didn't get it. He'd never had any interest in people like that. It did mean that while Naruto was stuck with the Sannin, every escape attempt thwarted, and having to finally accept he was not going anywhere, he had an avenue for revenge. If Jiraiya insisted on ordering Naruto around and dragging him places against his will, he was going to make it as inconvenient as humanly possible for the man. Maybe if he annoyed him enough, He would just abandon Naruto to his fate, or take him back to Konoha, but Naruto was beyond caring. He'd already lost the freedom he'd had, even if he was still outside of the village. Jiraiya loomed over him like a fucking buzzkill, and every time Naruto wanted to go explore or go to a particular village, the man overruled him, even if he wasn't trying to escape or be difficult. Jiraiya hadn't managed to get near a bathhouse since that first village, and Naruto was feeling pretty proud of himself. The tactics Jiraiya used to keep him in one place long enough for him to peek at the bathhouses had been getting more and more extreme, and Naruto was honestly enjoying the chance to practice escaping the bonds. It felt like the first proper training since he'd left the Land of Waves, although he was sure it wasn't Jiraiya's intention. "Hurry it up, brat." Naruto slowed his footsteps even further. "Seriously?" Naruto sneered at the man. Jiraiya's annoyed expression had become very familiar by this point, and Naruto wondered how much more the man could stand. He had already lasted longer than anyone else who had experienced Naruto's particular brand of rebellion. "What is the point of this?" Jiraiya threw his hands up in frustration, stopping in the middle of the dirt road and whirling around to face Naruto. "I'm doing you a favor, you damned brat. I haven't taken you back to Konoha, and I've stopped you from being snatched up by the Akatsuki. You could learn to be a little more grateful and lot less of a little shit." Naruto stopped, scowling. This was the problem. Jiraiya kept telling him how grateful he should be and how great he was for taking Naruto on as a student, and he was sick of it. He didn't choose any of this. If he was going to choose anyone to be stuck with, it would be Gai Sensei or Sasuke. Even Kakashi or God's forbid Neji would be better than this guy. At least he could kick Neji's ass when he annoyed him. He'd tried to ask Naruto a bunch of questions about his life back in Konoha and what led to his defection. It had taken about a week for him to finally get the message that Naruto wasn't going to tell him shit. He hadn't earned a single thing from Naruto, and the combination of silent treatment and insults had finally managed to make their way through the man's thick skull enough for him to stop with the interrogation. He didn't know why he thought that Naruto owed him anything, but he was not having it. "Whatever, Ero Sennin," he snapped, the nickname expressing how little Naruto respected or cared about his damn opinion. "I told you to stop calling me that." "Boo-hoo." Jiraiya's face twisted unpleasantly. "How the fuck a demon like you came from Minato and Kushina I'll never fucking know," the Sannin said to himself, but Naruto heard. Jiraiya spoke a bit louder. "What happened back in Konoha, huh? Why are you like this?" Naruto threw the bastard a middle finger, stuck on the demon comment. The village had used it a lot in reference to the Kyuubi, but it had become a way to describe him, as if he and the tailed beast were one and the same. Naruto knew Jiraiya used it in reference to his attitude towards the man, but it brought up old anger and hurt he'd wanted to leave back in Konoha. "What a shame they got themselves killed, so we can't ask them." Naruto's words dripped with poison, the insincerity palpable. They were too busy being pathetic to save themselves. Jiraiya's face clouded over, and Naruto knew he'd hit the man's weak spot. For some reason, the man was attached to the idea of the Yondaime and his wife, reacting badly whenever Naruto badmouthed them or even suggested anything vaguely negative about them. He saved it for the times that his usual tactics fell through, as a last resort. It never failed to land. "Do not talk about them." Naruto shoved his hands in his pockets, staring down the man's furious gaze. "Why do you even care?" Naruto asked, not really looking for an answer. "They're dead. They don't care. Have some damn respect for the dead." Jiraiya snapped, turning around to stomp down the dirt road, Naruto slowly starting to follow. "You owe them everything." "I owe them all right," Naruto growled. He owed them for the shit he put up with from the village and the unfair treatment from the Hokage and the misery he felt every second he spent within the village walls. "We'll reach the next town by nightfall." Jiraiya's voice was clipped. Naruto didn't answer. Jiraiya sat the bar and downed the sake placed in front of him. He felt like he'd aged a decade in the past few weeks. His godson was a nightmare given flesh, and he was no closer to figuring out why. Naruto was vicious, vindictive, petty, disrespectful, and had awful temper. Any attempt Jiraiya made to try to get to know him, to figure out how they got there, was met with unyielding resistance. The brat would sooner bite off his own tongue than give Jiraiya even a scrap of personal information. The brat was mean. He took any and all opportunities to annoy Jiraiya, and it was really starting to grate on him now. He hadn't been able to do any research since picking the brat up, and it was itching at him, and that was just the tip of the iceberg. The stupid nickname, the futile escape attempts, the insults, the open disrespect, the comments on Minato and Kushina, it was a lot. Jiraiya was a seasoned shinobi, and it would take more than some mean-spirited words to truly affect him enough for it to change anything, but it was frustrating. Naruto had made it his personal mission to make Jiraiya as miserable as he was, and he hated to admit it, but it was working. What had gone so wrong with his godson? What happened while he wasn't there? He had sent a toad to Sarutobi-sensei for answers, but there had been no reply yet. He knew his teacher would be busy with the Chunin exams right now, so the delay was to be expected. He downed the next cup of sake, checking on Naruto's chakra signature. He was still in the room and there were no clones that he could detect around the village. That had been a fun way to discover his godson's proficiency with Kage Bunshin. He hadn't been able to get an accurate gauge of Naruto's abilities since they hadn't had a proper training session yet. Maybe that would calm the brat down and get him to see that Jiraiya was on his side. He had been able to see glimpses of it. He was reluctantly impressed that the brat kept wiggling out of every restraint he could put on him when he tried to take a precious moment for his research. He still wasn't sure how the brat had gotten out of the last seal, but it wasn't as if he could ask him. Naruto would just insult him and his sealing. He had to remember Naruto was just a child. He was an adult in shinobi terms, but he was only 12. He was lashing out, and while Jiraiya didn't know why, it was in line with the immaturity and short-sightedness he could remember from his own youth. The brat would come around, if Jiraiya didn't kill him first. He held up a hand, ordering another sake. He had to figure something out before they headed out tomorrow morning. Things could not keep going like this. Jiraiya did want to help his godson becoming stronger, but they couldn't do anything while they were at odds like this. He had to figure out a way to break through to the kid. He could teach him the Rasengan? Surely the kid wouldn't be able to turn down learning a super powerful jutsu. His thoughts were interrupted by the puff of smoke appearing on the counter of the bar. Jiraiya grinned at the toad, taking the scroll in her hands and thanking her. It was about time, Sarutobi-sensei replied. Maybe this would have something to help him with the brat. He unrolled the scroll and scanned the document. Sarutobi-sensei? The parchment crinkled under his white-knuckled grip. He dumped money for sake on the counter and turned towards their inn, intent on finding the kid and getting the hell out of there. It couldn't be true. Sarutobi-sensei was fine and Konoha was fine and everything would be fine. They had to get back to Konoha. He didn't care what the brat had to say about it. Jiraiya was no longer humoring him. He didn't care if he had to knock the little shit out. Sarutobi-sensei and Konoha needed them. The scroll had mentioned they hadn't been able to reach Tsunadeheim. There was a lot of wounded and they needed her. Damn it, he might need to drag her back himself at some point. He just hoped that the attack wasn't as bad as they made it sound. Konoha was strong. Not even a tailed beast could keep them down. Otto and Suna may have caught them off guard, but Konoha was strong. They had to be fine. Sakura shoved her hair back from where it had escaped her ponytail. She knew she was adding more dirt, but it would hardly make a difference. She'd been covered in a layer of dirt and grime long before she'd started helping with the recovery efforts. It had all happened so fast. She hadn't been at the stadium, the epicenter of the main attack. She hadn't been able to stomach watching Ino and the rest of her academy classmates jump so far ahead of her while her own career fell apart, so she had gone to a quiet training ground on her own. Naruto left and then Kakashi-sensei tells her that she's being transferred to another team, and then she finds out Sasuke also left the village. That had been a kick in the gut. Both her teammates had abandoned the village and she hadn't known, hadn't been able to even pick up a hint about their plans to do so. Another reason she'd found herself alone in the training ground was to escape the gossip about the Uchiha. All the whispers that Naruto had corrupted him and tempted him away. She hated the staring from everyone else. Most of the time she couldn't tell if it was pity or accusing or if they thought she was next. She had tried so hard, trained so hard, after joining Team 7, and she was proud of the progress she'd made, even if no one else had been. She felt strong for the first time in her life, and it hurt that the people she wanted to see it the most were the people who looked right through her. Naruto had always been very upfront on his feelings, so Sakura couldn't hold it against him, but she had so wanted him to acknowledge her. The rose-colored lenses she had for Sasuke had been shattered a long time ago. She couldn't believe her younger self now. She couldn't blame Sasuke for not liking her back. Sakura couldn't say she liked herself in hindsight. Kakashi-sensei, his heart had never been in it. Their team hadn't fit together from the start and now they were in the aftermath. It was pretty clear how they'd gotten to this point. Still, they had been her team. They would always be her genin team, no matter what other team she landed in. She had been broken from her daily spiral on the state of her team by explosions, and by the time she looked in the direction of the village, the smoke was already rising. She'd run back as fast as she could, but everything had already started by then. She'd had to be told about the events in and around the stadium later since she'd never gotten close and it had sounded like a nightmare. Suna had unleashed a massive sand beast that was responsible for most of the property damage Konoha had suffered. She'd seen the sandy blob in the distance at some points, but she'd been too busy fighting for her life at the time to think more on it. She'd first arrived at the village to see the bodies. She hadn't seen dead bodies before. She'd always thought that they would look like they were sleeping, but they really didn't. They were too still and their cheeks too hollow and their skin too pale. She'd seen the Chunin around Konoha, usually talking to the body lying close by. The blood still dripped from his slashed throat and his brown eyes stared back at Sakura, glassy and empty, and they didn't even flinch when a fly landed right on the eyeball. Sakura hadn't been able to keep her stomach contents, heaving for several minutes as she saw the man behind her closed eyelids. Looking back, she'd been lucky not to be attacked at that moment. She would have died quickly. She'd run out of bile and pulled herself together slowly, looking out at the increasing amount of smoke that covered the village. She could hear the clash of kunai and the yelling and the crunching and splashing that she was absolutely not going to think about right now, and her feet moved before she could think, running to the closest sound. She'd come to a fight between Konoha and a shinobi from another village. They had a musical note on their Hite 8 and Sakura had recalled the mention of a relatively new village, Ato, who had participated in the Chunin exams. Why were they attacking Konoha? The pair noticed her and it was long enough for the Konoha nin to take the advantage. Sakura watched with wide eyes as the Chunin stuck a kunai deep into the Ato nin's eye, the enemy falling to the ground with a wet thump. You a genin? Sakura's voice caught in her throat, but she managed a nod. The Chunin was covered in dirt and blood and other stains she couldn't identify right now, and she knew that this is what happened as a kunoichi, but holy shit. You weren't at the stadium with the rest of them, the Chunin said mostly to herself, the red triangles on her cheeks marking her as an Inuzuka. She couldn't see the dogs that would normally accompany the clan member. Look, the enemy is Suna and Ato. It's kill on sight for any of them. You understanding me? Sakura quickly nodded. Stick with me, the Chunin ordered. I can't send you off on your own as a genin, but I need you to pull your weight, okay? I say jump, you jump, got it? Yes, Sakura finally found her voice. Okay. What's your name? Sakura. I'm Hana. The academy has been covered, but we need to go bolster the defenses around the hospital. If you see any injured, let me know so we can take them with us. You know basic first aid? Sakura nodded again, following after Hana as she set off. She didn't know how long she and Hana had fought together in the end. It all became a blur, and if anyone had asked Sakura to recall any details, she would have had nothing to say. It was fight after fight, and she knew that she never would have survived if she hadn't been training as hard as she had. The faces of the villagers she felt no pulse for didn't sink in, and the ones who were still breathing they didn't stick around to remember, just handing them to the closest medic nin. She took her first life that day. It was a teen not much older than her, an awful sneer on his face. 3 Ato nin had gotten the jump on her and Hana. The Chunin was managing 2 of them, leaving Sakura with this guy. She was pretty sure he had underestimated her, whether it was her age, her rank, her gender, she would never know. She could only be grateful he did when she finally managed to sink her kunai into his chest, the blade becoming stuck and dragging her to the ground with him. The breath had been knocked from her lungs and it had taken another 2 attempts to yank the kunai from his chest, the wet sound sickening. She had learned not to lose any kunai if she could help it. She'd turned to see Hana looking approvingly back at her, the other 2 Ato nin dead on the ground. Her cheek had throbbed and Sakura was pretty sure half her body was a massive bruise, but she couldn't stop. She took more lives that day, but it didn't affect her like the first. She'd seen too many bodies to ever be bothered by something like that again. She didn't know how many hours had passed when the fighting became far and few between. She and Hana were able to spend more time digging shinobi and civilians from the rubble, Hana's dogs appearing to guard them. Hana had said after that they'd been sent to guard over a preschool group nearby, and when an Inuzuka Junin had finally found them, he'd let the Haimaru brothers go back to Hana. It certainly sped up the search. Sakura couldn't say at what point the attack was deemed as over. She was pretty sure it still wasn't. She hadn't seen a living Otto or Sunanen in hours by this point, and she'd fully moved on to recovery efforts now. Hana had forced her to have a quick checkup and meal at the hospital before they'd headed back out. It had been long enough to find out that Kiba, who turned out to be Hana's little brother, hadn't survived the stadium attack. Shino, his teammate, had passed as well, and she'd managed to find out Ino did survive but was admitted to hospital with grave injuries. Hana had left to find her clan members in the wake of the news about her brother, and Sakura had been picked up by another Chunin organizing the recovery efforts. She'd been paired with Shikamaru, the Nara injured but well enough to help dig people out of the rubble. She didn't know what to say to him. They had never spoken back when they'd been classmates, and she didn't know what to say to him now. Konoha was devastated. Half the buildings in the village were in ruins, most of the civilian casualties a result of the building collapses. Sakura didn't think things would ever be normal again. She dreaded the final body count. All her worries and anger about her team seemed so small in comparison. Naruto and Sasuke had abandoned the village, but she hadn't. She still loved Konoha, and she was a proud member of this village. She hated that this had happened, and she hated even more that there was nothing she could have done to help more, not at her current skill level. It was a quiet moment with Shikamaru that helped her realize her path forward. "I'm sorry about Ino," she'd told him as they shared a water bottle, sitting on a pile of rocks that used to be a cafe. "I hope she pulls through. Choji too. I know you're friends with Ino," Shikamaru had answered quietly, all traces of the usual nonchalance and laziness she remembered from the academy gone. "She missed you at the stadium, but I guess that was for the best." Sakura looked back out to the shinobi guiding limping civilians away from what used to the market. "I hate this," she whispered. "I hate I couldn't stop them. We're just genin," Shikamaru shrugged, taking another swig of water. "How much could we have done?" "We could do more," she answered, knowing it in her heart to be true. "We could do so much more, but we need to get stronger." Shikamaru was silent for a moment. "I'm sorry about your team." "That's different," she scoffed. "They abandoned Konoha. They weren't here to help. They left you," Shikamaru continued. "It can't be easy being the one left behind." "Well, I'm just going to have to become the strongest in the entire damn village and beat their asses when I see them next," Sakura vowed. "I'll become strong enough that something like this can't ever happen again. People should be safe, and I don't ever want to drag bodies out of their own homes again." She wasn't sure where the declaration came from, but she felt it settle in her heart. She meant it. She would become strong, and no one would ever look down on her again, and she would be able to protect the village. "I've been slacking." She looked over to Shikamaru. "I've been doing the bare minimum." The confession felt raw. Shikamaru's face twisted in an expression Sakura had never seen from him before. "I just wanted to skate by, be an ordinary chunin. Live an ordinary life where I didn't have to try or work hard or go out of my way. I beat the genjutsu at the stadium, but then lay there doing nothing, hoping it would all fix itself without me, and now I have probably lost my teammates. I don't even know if my parents are okay, and I don't know how many of my clan are dead." Sakura hadn't had the time or space to wonder about her own parents. They were civilians, so they couldn't defend themselves. She also knew, from being around the fighting in the hospital, that she probably wouldn't be able to track them down herself. She would have to go look at the lists when they finished the search. She hated that she couldn't even bring herself to be upset. She was just empty. "Then do something about it," she told him, his dark eyes looking over at her. "I was the weakest on my team, and Naruto let me know it. I've been trying to change that, and I am nowhere close, but one thing I learned from him is that moping around and self-pity isn't going to get you anywhere." She would always be grateful to him for that, as much as she was angry too. "So we get stronger," Shikamaru nodded, something settling in his eyes. "We build a future where something like this never happens again. A future where people have time to just watch the clouds without worry. A future where we can fight anyone who tries to hurt the village," Sakura agreed. "A future where everyone feels safe and happy and no one has a reason to leave." The promise settled between the pair of them, and Sakura didn't know how they would do it, but they would. She hoped Ino and Choji recovered and the rest of her classmates unaccounted for turned up safe, so they could all work together towards this future. She could do it on her own, but she was tired of fighting by herself. As horrifying as this battle had been, it had shown her what it was like to really work with people and be part of a real team. It made her experience as part of Team 7 even more pathetic. Sakura looked over the ruins of her village. She would never let this happen again. Chapter 29. We need to go, brat. Naruto ignored him. I'm serious. Get up. Naruto purposefully turned over in the futon so his back was to Jiraiya. His eyes snapped open as he felt something grab his leg and he was torn from the covers, dangling upside down from the massive fist of the Sannin. What the fuck, Ero Sennin? He grouched. I wasn't even doing anything. We need to go. Jiraiya released him and Naruto landed on all fours, glaring up at the Junin. He slept in all his gear anyway so he was ready to go at a moment's notice, but that wasn't for Jiraiya's benefit. What crawled up your ass? Konoha has been attacked. Naruto paused. Attacked? Otto and Suna attacked the village in the final round of the Chunin exams. We need to go. Naruto's thought immediately jumped to Gai-sensei. He had to be okay, right? No one was stronger than Gai-sensei. Sasuke would be okay too, and Kakashi. Hayate and Yugao were strong too. They were all fine. Tuchi and Ayame were civilians but they were tough. He kind of hated that was his first thought. He was supposed to be leaving the village behind. He couldn't even ask Jiraiya if they were okay. Gods forbid the Sannin find out Naruto had a soft spot for anyone. It would give him ideas that he might be able to win Naruto over, and he was not having that. You know, I always thought it would be me to burn the village down. He thought out loud. Never thought someone would beat me to it. This is not the fucking time, brat. Jiraiya snarled, and wow, Naruto hadn't seen him this pissed off yet. He needed to up his game. What's the point in even going back? He continued, unfazed. Sounds like there isn't a village to go back to. He didn't have time to even flinch when Jiraiya grabbed the back on his hoodie and threw him out of the window with a loud crash. Naruto hissed as he felt shards of glass dig into his back, but he managed to soften the landing, glaring up at Jiraiya, who jumped out of the window after him. This is serious, you little shit. Jiraiya yelled. It was different than all the other times the Sannin had yelled at him up to now. People died. Sarutobi-sensei died. Naruto blinked. The Hokage had died? Things had soured considerably between he and the old man in recent years, but it still knocked the wind out of him. He'd known the old man his whole life, even if they had parted on bad terms. And I care why? He snapped, trying to save face. It's not like I was ever going to see any of them again. So you're telling me that there is not a single person in the village that you care about? Not a single person you want to know survived? Gai-sensei's face appeared again, Sasuke's and the others flashing by quickly, but not quickly enough. Naruto could see the moment Jiraiya realized he had taken a fraction too long to answer. My point stands. Naruto crossed his arms defensively. What exactly do you think you will be able to do if we go back? The damage has been done. Naruto knew he had a point. By the time they even made it back to Konoha, at least a week would have passed and the recovery efforts would have been well underway for a while. Is there absolutely nothing you can do that doesn't involve going back to the village? It was not his most subtle attempt, almost embarrassingly transparent, but Naruto had managed to keep away from the village this long. There had to be something he could say that would keep Jiraiya away from the village. We have to back to the land of fire, Jiraiya answered, voice hard and unyielding, and Naruto knew he wouldn't be able to get out of this one. The fact the Sannin had said, land of fire, and not Konoha, did give him a little hope. He would just have to play along for now. If it looked like Jiraiya was dragging him back to Konoha, he would figure something out. He had time. Not enough time. He hadn't had nearly enough time to figure something out. They had reached the land of fire a lot quicker than Naruto had been anticipating, and the Sannin was a lot less tolerant of his bullshit. The man didn't ask him questions and didn't try to get to know him anymore. It was what Naruto wanted, but it still felt weird. Jiraiya had been different since the news about Konoha, and everything they'd heard on their travels hadn't helped. Apparently the damage was a lot worse than Jiraiya had said. They'd apparently lost at least a third of the civilian population and quarter of the shinobi forces. The genin ranks in particular had been decimated. There were very few buildings left standing, and there had already been whispers of other shinobi villages taking advantage. Konoha hadn't been this weak to its enemies like ever. He had managed to get some information on Sasuke. The news of the defection of the last Uchiha, coinciding with the attack, had led to many rumors that Sasuke had sold Konoha out. Naruto was just glad that he wasn't in the village for the attack, and he was even happier to hear that he'd left the village at all. He kind of wished that Sasuke had come with him when he'd asked, but they were sure to run into each other outside the village. Sasuke was chasing after his own goals, and Naruto had no doubts that he would succeed. Something in his chest had loosened at the news that his teammate hadn't been present for the devastation of Konoha, that he was safe. Sasuke would kick his ass for the thought. It made him smile. Jiraiya had demanded if he'd known Sasuke would do something like that. Naruto had asked why he would know something like that. Just because they were on the same team didn't mean he knew anything about his teammates. One of his more bold-faced lies, but apparently time around Naruto had convinced Jiraiya that Naruto was incapable of having friends or being any version of friendly, so he didn't question it. Naruto didn't think Sasuke sold Konoha out personally, but it didn't really matter in the grand scheme of things. He was a missing nin now, which was kind of funny considering Naruto technically wasn't now. They had been heading in a different direction than Konoha for a day or two, and Naruto could feel the hope bubbling in his chest. So where are we going? Jiraiya didn't answer him, and Naruto rolled his eyes. All that time trying to get Naruto to talk to him, and now he ignores him. The attack on Konoha and the loss of the Hokage had rattled the Sannin, and he'd been grumpy and miserable the whole trip to the Land of Fire. It was an interesting role reversal. We need to find Tsunade, Jiraiya finally answered him. Who's that? Jiraiya actually turned to look at him, still walking down the dirt road. You don't know the Sannin? I know the Sannin, as like a concept, Naruto shrugged. Never really cared to learn the names, didn't seem important. Jiraiya grumbled something beneath his breath. We need to find her, he spoke a bit louder. Konoha needs her medical abilities. Naruto nodded, suppressing his grin. They weren't heading for Konoha. They had to find this Sannin lady first. This was good. This gave him more time. Jiraiya might want to head to Konoha with Tsunade, but he would figure that out when it happened. He continued to follow Jiraiya quietly down the road, the Sannin falling back into grim silence. Neji stepped outside of the walls of the clan compound, taking a breath of the cold morning air. He hated meetings with the clan. As a member of the branch family, he was beholden to any orders from the main family, and in the wake of the attack that had devastated Konoha, apparently a meeting had been due. They'd lost several clan members and been recruited along with the Aburame and the Inuzuka to search for survivors due to their clan techniques. It had been a very long 2 weeks, and Neji had seen more bodies than he would ever be comfortable seeing again. The funeral for everyone lost was finally organized for a couple days' time, so the Hyuga clan had wanted to inform their members of the plans for their own clan members and the changes to succession. He had never particularly liked Hinata. She was too soft, too sensitive, too weak. Neji hated the idea of having someone he could easily beat in a fight in charge of his life, and he had never really tried to hide that. He couldn't be rude or anything, but he'd managed to make his displeasure known. Hinata was a coward, so she avoided him, which suited him just fine. Still, he had hardly recognized her today. She had lost both her teammates in the attack, and it had obviously affected her heavily. The life had vanished from her eyes, and although she had recovered from her own injuries, Neji knew she wouldn't be able to lead the clan. He had never had any confidence in her before, but this seemed to be the final straw. Hanabi, her little sister, had been named the new successor, and Neji didn't think he was going to like any more than he had when it had been Hinata, but for very different reasons. Hanabi was stronger and more confident, but she also believed in the hierarchy of the clan far more than Hinata ever did. It meant that Neji's place in the branch family would be even more constricting than it had been before. Hinata would undergo training to later be wed for political alliances when she was older. Neji didn't envy her. The Hyuga clan had changed, although Neji couldn't be sure if it was for the better or worse. He knew it wouldn't affect his own goals though. He refused to let the history and laws of the clan stop him from becoming strong and finding his own place in the village, independent of submissive role he'd been unwilling assigned at birth. He set off, walking through the once colorful and vibrant streets. The rubble had been shoved to the sides of the path to clear enough for people to walk through, but nothing had been done about the state of the buildings themselves. He'd heard that would start after the funeral. Now they'd found all the bodies. Dust still lingered in the air and it was eerily silent, although Neji had become somewhat used to it over the past couple of weeks. He saw people digging through the ruins to try and gather supplies or belongings and more than one civilian sobbing in front of what used to be their home. The hyuga had been lucky, only sustaining damage to the western portion of their compound. Many of the other clans, such as the Nara and the Akamichi, had also come out mostly unscathed, but others hadn't been so lucky. The old Uchiha compound had remained almost entirely untouched, so displaced civilians had been allocated there, much of the houses still in working order if not a bit dusty. He wasn't sure if they'd cleaned the bloodstains from the original massacre, but it wasn't as if the civilians had a choice with half of Konoha destroyed. It wasn't as if the last Uchiha was here to protest. He'd betrayed the village, much the same as his teammate, and Neji thought good riddance. Naruto had probably had something to do with it, but Neji refused to give the blonde any more thought than he already had. He had much bigger issues in his life to worry about rather than wasting energy on Uzumaki Naruto. He reached his destination, weaving between the stilled two-fold triage tents that had been set up in front of the main hospital. There was less than there had been, but they had too many patients and not enough medic nins, so it would take a while before they could go back at anything resuming normal here. Neji walked in the front doors, his feet taking him down the familiar path. He finally came to the door and shoved it open. "Neji." Tenten smiled at him. "How was the clan meeting?" "Insufferable," he replied dryly, taking a seat in the uncomfortable plastic chair reserved for visitors. "Your voice sounds more acceptable today." Tenten reached up to touch the bandages still wrapped around her neck. Neji recalled that she had been very lucky for the blade to have just missed one of her carotid arteries, but it was still a grievous injury. The scar would span from her chin to below her collarbones, and it would be a considerable width. He hadn't even seen it happen, having been separated from his team at the time, but he'd seen the wound when they'd changed the bandages on one of his visits. Her hair was down and she wore the standard blue robes of the hospital. Dark bags had settled beneath her eyes and Neji knew her dreams were about as peaceful as his own. He didn't know how she could still find it in herself to smile. "They're saying I can leave for the funeral and then just come back for regular checkups," she announced. "My dad has never been happier in his life and I am so sick of these stupid walls." The hospital room was rather dull. It was meant to be a small single room, but considering the volume of patients, Tenten shared it with their third teammate. "No change today," she told him, looking at the prone form in the bed. "They did say that they were going to try and bring him out of it tomorrow." Lee had been the closest to the Tsunade Jinchuriki when the attack had first begun. It wasn't until the massive sand beast had vanished and fighting started to die down that Neji found out about the extent of the damage. The medic nins thought that he'd been crushed by sand, with all four of his limbs in varying stages of what Neji could only describe as mangled. He'd been put into a medically induced coma to help with the pain and prevent movement, but it was hard to tell how much he had healed under the thick casts that covered each limb. It was enough to know that Lee wasn't coming back to their team anytime soon, if ever. "What's the plan for today then?" Tenten interrupted his thoughts. "I have to live vicariously through you, so. Guy-sensei is still busy with his Junin duties, so I will go to the mission assignment desk and see what can be done," Neji shrugged. "I shall train in the evening." "Sounds normal." Tenten smiled, but tears glistened in her eyes. She swallowed and roughly wiped her eyes. "Sorry, I thought I was done crying." Neji had become immune to the tears of others at this point. "I still can't believe this happened," she whispered. "So many people dead or injured. Lee might never be a shinobi again. Nothing will ever be normal again." There was nothing Neji could say to make her feel better, and that wasn't really his thing anyway. She was right. Things would never be normal again. A lot had changed in the past couple of weeks, and he knew that every single person in the village had been changed forever because of it, him included. "We've got to get a lot stronger." Tenten met his gaze, brown eyes still wet but shining with something else, an underlying, unyielding steel. "Konoha is going to need us and I don't want Guy-sensei worried about us." Neji had been having similar thoughts, although less altruistic than his teammate. He needed to become strong enough so that he could have the freedom to make his own decisions. He may have been a branch member, but the Hyuga clan was more than aware he was by far the strongest clan member his age, and they didn't even know about all the non-clan training and jutsu he had mastered. They could not afford to lose him and they knew it, especially in the wake of Hinata's demotion. but he was still a branch member and they could not have him showing up any members of the main family. It was a delicate balance and one Neji was determined to win. "We will become stronger," he said without a hint of doubt. "Lee is going to have a lot of catching up to do." Tenten smiled at their sleeping teammate, but Neji could hear the truth. Lee wasn't going to be able to catch up. He probably would never be a shinobi again. Neither of them had been able to bring themselves to say it out loud yet. Lee annoyed Neji. The taller boy had always been weaker than him but had always acted like he was a match for Neji, like they were equal rivals. Lee had changed a lot in their final year in the academy, but when they'd been placed on a team together, Neji hadn't had a higher opinion of him than when they'd met in their first year of the academy. In the year and a half they'd been teammates, Lee had won Neji's reluctant respect. He never gave less than 100% and he trained more than anyone Neji knew except for maybe Naruto. He had become stronger and stronger, and while he had still never beat Neji in a fight, he would say he was at least better than any of the other genin. Tenten had also changed over their time as teammates. She'd become more accurate and more confident and she stood side by side them. Neji hadn't expected his team to grow on him so much. He hadn't expected to actually like them. He certainly hadn't expected their team to end like this. "I should go," he said quietly. "I'll be back on missions with you soon," she smiled softly. "Don't be too lonely. Lee is the one to complain about that, not me," he answered just as softly, throwing one last look at the unconscious genin. "He's going to be insufferable when he wakes up. I can just imagine him trying to train in all those casts," Tenten chuckled. The attempt at humor died as quickly as it appeared. Neji waves and left the room, closing the door behind him. He started the familiar path out of the hospital, towards the temporary mission assignment desk that had been set up for the shinobi still fit for active duty. Everything had changed. Neji still didn't know if it was for the better or for the worse, but there was nothing he could do about it. He could only keep taking steps forward and keep getting stronger. The most important thing was that no matter what his future held now, it wasn't up to fate. It was up to him. Jiraiya walked into the town, Naruto trailing behind him. He was reaching the end of his rope with the brat. Minato be damned, he might just dump the kid back in the village and leave him to his fate. It was hard to find anything redeemable about the brat, especially the last couple weeks since the news of Konoha. He knew Naruto did not like Konoha, that fact was well established. He still hadn't expected the complete lack of interest in the fate of the village. He hadn't cared or asked if anyone was okay or the extent of the damage or about Sarutobi-sensei. Just quipped that he thought he'd been the one to do it. Jiraiya had almost maimed the brat in his fury. He refused to believe that there wasn't a single soul in Konoha that Naruto didn't care about enough to hope they'd survived. If there was, the brat had barely given a single hint. There was the Uchiha, but he hadn't been in the village, betraying the village much like his teammate. Naruto had claimed he hadn't known anything and Jiraiya had let him think that Jiraiya believed him, but he'd known the kid for a few weeks now. He could read him a lot better now and there was something between him and the Uchiha brat, more than he was willing to let on. Unfortunately, getting any personal information out of Naruto was like trying to lift an island out of the sea with his bare hands, so Jiraiya left it for now. He knew enough about Naruto to know that he was annoying and flippant on purpose. Jiraiya was sure that was a massive part of who he was, but it couldn't be all of it. There had to be something deeper to his godson. There had to be something worth putting up with his shitty attitude. He had to find out what happened to Naruto back in Konoha, but he knew well enough now that asking wasn't going to get him anywhere. He had been so close to going back to Konoha, when he'd first found out that had been his intention. Naruto had a point though. There wasn't much Jiraiya could actually do if he went back right now. The fighting was over and Jiraiya was reconnaissance and combat orientated, neither skill set which would much use post-attack, and he refused to become Hokage. He could keep an ear out and stop any other villages from taking advantage or warn Konoha with enough time they could defend themselves. He also could find Tsunade and convince her to go back. It was the most helpful thing he could do for the village right now, but he hated that it felt like Naruto was winning. He headed for the first bar he saw, Naruto still trailing behind him. The brat had at least stopped his escape attempts after the last time. If only Jiraiya knew that all it would take was 4 foot for rope, a toad summon, a paralysis seal and a pair of unwashed socks to convince the brat that escape was not only impossible, but a very bad idea. Drinking already? Naruto snarked at him. Didn't know we had time for that. The kid was still being bitter over them skipping the last town. The brat had wanted to stop at the ramen stall but Jiraiya had refused, not wanting to miss Tsunade in this town. She'd already been here 3 days and she was bound to be leaving soon. Not that he told the brat the reason why. If he just asked Jiraiya instead of complaining and insulting him, then he would have told him. Jiraiya ignored him as they entered the bar and he saw who he was looking for. Tsunade Hime. The blonde head turned toward him and Jiraiya couldn't help the skip in his heartbeat when she turned unimpressed brown eyes towards him. She was still as beautiful as the last time he saw her. Jiraiya? She yelled, standing from the bench and slamming the palms of her hands on the table. Why are you here? I finally found you, he replied walking over to the table. I'm exhausted. He slumped onto the bench opposite, nodding a greeting at Shizune. Naruto slunk in after him, narrowed eyes staring at Tsunade. Seriously, Jiraiya, why are you here? Did you hear about Konoha? Tsunade frowned at him, taking another swig of sake. I try to not to listen to anything about Konoha, you know that. Sarutobi-sensei is dead, he said abruptly. No point in mincing words. Konoha was attacked by Otto and Suna. We lost about a third of the civilians and a quarter of the shinobi. They need you. The sake cup fell from Tsunade's frozen hand, landing on the table with a clatter. No, I'm sorry, Hime, but they need you. Tsunade looked down at the sake cup, now cracked up one side. Jiraiya had a feeling she hadn't heard. She refused to listen to anything about the village and she'd probably spent the last 2 weeks in various gambling dens and bars, too drunk to really listen to idle chat. Shizune would have had heard at least something but she wouldn't have mentioned it to Tsunade. She probably wouldn't have realized how bad the attack actually was. Such was the nature of gossip. There has been many stories floating around the land of fire. Jiraiya, I can't. His heart sank. He had expected the answer but this wasn't a normal circumstance. She had to know how serious this was. They need you, Tsunade, he insisted, leaning forward. People are dying and they need you. They need a new Hokage. Her eyes widened but Jiraiya just met her gaze head on. She was the best choice for Hokage and even if she wasn't, they still need her for her medical knowledge. Konoha needed Tsunade and he wasn't leaving until she understood that. This old hag is going to be Hokage? All eyes dropped to Naruto, who had stolen the snacks from Tsunade's side of the table. He looked back, blue eyes unimpressed, and Jiraiya knew this meeting about to go sideways. Chapter 30. Naruto shoved another taiyaki in his mouth, unbothered by the sudden silence. So this was Tsunade? He wasn't impressed. She didn't look like she was the same age as Jiraiya but Jiraiya could just look super old for his age. Tsunade had pale blonde hair tied back into a ponytail, with thick strands framing the side of her face. Brown eyes were staring at him and she had a small blue mark in the middle of her forehead that looked like a diamond. She wore a simple sleeveless sage kimono with a forest green obi wrapped around her waist and a forest green kimono rest on her shoulders. Her companion looked younger, short black hair to her shoulders and large, dark eyes also staring at him. She was dressed in an all-black kimono. Who are you calling an old hag? Tsunade demanded furiously as Jiraiya face-palmed beside him. Naruto raised an eyebrow. You never said she was going to be Hokage. He spoke to Jiraiya instead, the words muffled by the food in his mouth. Do you care? Jiraiya looked at his open mouth vaguely disgusted but the man had a point. Maybe he knew Naruto a little better than he thought. Nope, Naruto swallowed the mouthful before stuffing the next one in. They hadn't eaten since breakfast and after missing out on ramen yesterday, his stomach felt a little too empty. Carry on. Who is this brat? Tsunade snarled. It was nice that she didn't know. His hair had started to grow back although it was still shorter than when he'd first hacked it off. His face was clear of sunscreen and dirt so his whisker marks were visible. He hadn't needed the disguise since he was traveling with Jiraiya but the bucket hat had grown on him. He'd put his black shinobi gear and his sleeveless orange hoodie back on so he looked like himself again. This is Uzumaki Naruto, Jiraiya introduced and Naruto caught the recognition in her eyes. Damn. Naruto opened his mouth to show off the half-eaten contents of his mouth as she looked at him. Her lips curled in disgust. Did you not beat any manners into him? Naruto snorted. Jiraiya couldn't even stop him calling him Ero Sennin. The Sannin's elbow was shoved into his ribs and he coughed as he inhaled a stray crumb. He swallowed hard and glared at the man. Tsunade, what's your answer? Jiraiya brought the conversation back on track. I refuse, she replied immediately, and Naruto caught the look of shock from her companion. He blinked as a pig jumped into the younger Kunoichi's lap, wearing a red dress and a string of pearls. What the, you know what, not his problem. I'm not going back. Well, I think this went rather well. Naruto swallowed the last of the snack, pushing the cleared plate back to the women's side of the table. Are we done here or is there more food? Unlike your last apprentice, this kid is not only rude, disrespectful and foul-mouthed, but he's ugly to match, Tsunade replied, and Naruto scowled. It's tough on anyone to be compared to the Yondaime. Something clicked in his brain. That's why you're so sensitive whenever I talk shit about him, he wondered aloud. I figured you knew him, but I didn't know you taught him. Wow, you did kind of a shit job since you outlived him, huh? He didn't even mean it in a malicious way this time. He really had been wondering how they knew each other and why it was so easy to use the Yondaime against Jiraiya. Watch your tongue, brat. It was Tsunade who unexpectedly came to the defense. You'll never be half the man he was. Good, Naruto snapped back. If I ever end up like that asshole, take me out the back and stab me in the head. Her eyes widened. He was a shit Hokage, just like the Sandaime, no doubt just like every Hokage before them and every Hokage after them, he continued, twisting his words further, trying to make them hurt. Konoha is a doomed village and it isn't worth it. Tsunade slammed a hand on the table and it cracked in half. Naruto didn't actively seek out these kinds of situations, but she had insulted him and talked down to him before he even had the chance to earn it, and he'd had plenty of practice using his words to find weak points during his time with Jiraiya. Not a skill he had really used in Konoha, mostly just avoiding situations like that and lashing out when cornered, but since Jiraiya had dragged him out of the land of water, he'd had plenty of pent-up rage and no way to avoid unleashing it on the closest person to him. Not that he really wanted to stop himself from lashing out at Jiraiya. Shut your mouth, she snarled. Why do you care? He sniped back. You don't want to be Hokage anyway and you aren't going back to help. The village dying isn't going to affect your life since you avoid the place like the fucking plague anyway. What difference does it make to you? That question seemed to stop her short, the anger draining from her quicker than he expected. You don't know anything about my relationship with Konoha, she hissed, but it was much quieter than before. I know you are willing to let it crumble to the ground without lifting a finger to help, Naruto shrugged. I'm not saying that as a bad thing. I would be more than happy for that place to be ground into dust. I'm with you, I wouldn't go back either. I just don't know why you're getting so pissed off about it. What is wrong with you? All eyes were drawn to the younger woman, her dark eyes just staring at Naruto in horror. Aren't you a Konoha shinobi? Don't you care about the village? Nope, he answered easily. I wouldn't really choose to be a Konoha shinobi, but it's that or prison, so you know. He trailed off, shrugging. He honestly couldn't care less about what happened to the village itself. He had people he cared about, but they weren't tied to the village in his mind. They were Konoha shinobi, yes, but Naruto didn't associate them with the village. Sasuke wasn't even there, and he knew Gai-sensei and Kakashi were strong enough to have survived unscathed. The others he wasn't so sure about, but he couldn't afford to think about it. He couldn't let himself go back to the village, not for anything or anyone. If they truly knew him, they would understand that. Silence descended over the group and Naruto rolled his eyes. For people who spend all their time away from the village, they sure were being super fucking sensitive about it. Can I go? He looked over to Jiraiya, who was watching with an unreadable expression. Sure, brat, he said. Do not leave. Don't leave the village, don't steal anything, don't start any fights, don't defect to any other shinobi villages, don't get arrested, don't blow anything up, don't kill anyone, Naruto listed off, getting up from his seat and rolling his eyes. The list had expanded significantly since they'd first met and he hadn't even tried half the things on it. I know, Ero Sennin. Shizune, leave us. He turned and left the bar. He didn't know how long it would take for them to finish arguing about this, but it should be long enough to get some training in now Jiraiya wasn't looking. He remembered a clearing close to the edge of town. What the hell is wrong with him? Tsunade demanded. Jiraiya sighed heavily, dropping his head into his hands. I wish I knew. No, seriously, Jiraiya, Tsunade continued. How did Minato and Kushina's brat end up like that? What did he mean prison? He defected from the village. Jiraiya lifted his head from his hands. I found him in the land of water as a missing nin about to be kidnapped. I convinced the village he's now my personal student so the Anbu don't arrest him, but I'm at a loss with him, Tsunade. Nothing I say gets through to him, and I know if he was given a chance to murder me in exchange for permanent freedom, I would already be dead. Tsunade sat back, processing his words. What happened? I have my suspicions, Jiraiya began. So you know the stigma around Jinchuriki? She nodded. I think Naruto suffered at the hands of the villagers, he continued. I didn't want to believe it. I never thought Sarutobi-sensei would allow it, but it's the only thing that makes sense. He hates the village, but he doesn't actually want to destroy it himself. He just wants to be away from it. He threatened to release the Kyuubi if I ever tried to take him back. Damn it, Tsunade swore. What the hell was the old man playing at? I honestly don't know. He paused at the mention of the late Hokage. You really won't go back? Tsunade went silent. Tsunade? Fuck. She slammed back the rest of the sake, just drinking straight from the bottle. Fuck, she repeated with no less feeling than the first. The kid got to you, Jiraiya slowly realized. You still care about the village. Of course I do, she snapped. Doesn't mean I want to be the fucking Hokage though. You're the only one who can do the job. Why don't you do it? I need to be out here with my information network, Jiraiya explained. Otto and Suna are just the beginning. There's movement in the shadows of all the nations and I don't want to be caught off guard again. I'm more useful away from the village. He took a breath before continuing. I also need to keep an eye on Naruto. He's already almost been kidnapped once and there's no way in hell we are going to get him to go back to the village willingly. He can stay with me and I'll train him and protect him and show him that there are people on his side. If given enough time, I can convince him that being a part of Konoha is the best thing for him. You really think you can do that? What other option is there? And how long are you planning for this training trip? At what point does it become a lost cause? I can't believe he's lost, Jiraiya replied quietly. I can't believe that this rude, guarded, shitty little brat is all that's left of Minato and Kushina. He's been hurt, badly. He just needs time to heal, away from Konoha. Does he know your relation to him? No, Tsunade, I have not told the brat who hates my guts that I'm his godfather, he drawled. That won't end badly. It will be even worse when he does find out. Jiraiya rubbed his brow. She didn't need to tell him that. You know why I don't want to go back, she continued in a quiet voice that very unlike her. I can't be Hokage, Jiraiya. You know that. I know, Jiraiya nodded. I wish there was another choice. Konoha needs you, Haim, and you have a choice. You can ignore them and go back to this self-destructive spiral you've been stuck in since Nawaki and Dan died, or you can step up and help people who desperately need it, because I'll be honest. If you don't, I don't know how much of a village there will be to go back to. He took a risk using their names, but he needed her to understand. I hate you. I know. I'll go back. Jiraiya froze. What? I said I'll go back. She threw the sake cup at him, but he barely even noticed. I'm not going to be Hokage, but I'll go back and help with the healing shit. What about the blood? I'll figure it out, she muttered, looking very unhappy with her own decision. Fucking that shitty fucking brat. I was fine before he opened his big mouth. If someone had told Jiraiya that Tsunade was going to be convinced by Naruto to go back to Konoha after decades of avoiding the place like the plague, he would not have believed it. How did he? He couldn't help but ask. He was right, she hissed. If I don't go back now, if I let Konoha fall without even trying to help, I hate Konoha for taking Nawaki and Dan away from me but not enough to lose it. That would make their deaths even more pointless and I can't have that. She looked at him, brown eyes serious and unwavering. If I do this though, you have to fix him. You have to get him to care about Konoha, even care about other people. I'll give you 3 years, Jiraiya. 3 years to convince him to come back. If I don't? It wasn't a threat. Jiraiya really didn't know if he could. I don't know. Tsunade threw up her hands. Figure it out. Thank you, Haim. Don't thank me yet, she sneered. I may change my way on the way or when I get there, and I won't stay a moment longer than I have to. Jiraiya knew she thought she meant it, but she would stay. She would help. She hadn't made this decision lightly, and if she was going to do this, then she would throw herself into it wholeheartedly. It was one of the things he loved about her. I better go tell the brat then. She waved him away, crumbling into herself. Jiraiya left her to grieve, heading to where he could feel Naruto's chakra signature. He wouldn't tell the brat about the 3-year deadline. Naruto would just take it as a challenge to figure out a way to get away before those 3 years were up. He would just have to keep working on him and try to earn his trust. He hadn't gotten anywhere yet, but he'd only had the boy for a few weeks. He could do a lot more in 3 years. Guy walked into the Junin standby station, just back from his latest mission. It had been a very tough month since the Chunin exams. Guy had not seen anything like it since the Third Shinobi War, and he had hoped he never would again, much less to his own village. It had caught them off guard and they had only barely managed to fight the enemy off. Hokage-sama had incapacitated Orochimaru, which had triggered the retreat, but they had managed to do a lot of damage in the meantime. Guy had no doubt it was over either. Konoha had to honor their dead and start rebuilding, but they would not let this go. Suna and Otto were now at the top of Konoha's list of enemies, and Guy dreaded the day they would be ordered to attack. He wished to protect Konoha, but he firmly believed they had quite enough death and destruction for the time being, especially the genin. He had been fortunate to still have his team among the living. Almost every other genin team had lost one member, most losing two, and the very unlucky ones that lost the whole team. There were many members of Naruto's graduating class that had succumbed to the fighting, and Guy could not help but remember how small they were when Naruto used to pick fights with them. They had lost over half their genin forces, and Guy knew it would have many long-term repercussions on Konoha's future. As much as he missed him, Guy was glad Naruto was not here for his. He did not think he could have bared to lose any of his students. Saying that, every single person had lost someone they knew that day, and he was not an exception. Neji was assisting with missions and Tenten had recently joined him, her wounds healing gradually. His team had been in the thick of it at the stadium, and Guy was so proud of them. They had fought and survived, and although they were not unscathed, scars were always a better alternative to death. His mood dropped at the thought of his final student. Lee had fought gallantly, burning with the spirit of youth, but he had been at the epicenter. He loved the boy, and he was so proud and honored to be his teacher. But no genin could stand up to the might of a Jinchuriki that had released their tailed beast. Lee had vanished from view in the sandstorm, and Guy had become preoccupied with the fighting and trying to protect the remaining genin and civilians. He would carry that dishonor and regret for the rest of his life. He had failed to protect his student, and now Lee was suffering the consequences. He may never be a shinobi again. They had tried to bring his young pupil out of his coma a couple of weeks ago, but it had not gone well, the boy in too much pain. They had quickly put him back under, deciding to wait until his limbs had healed further. No one was capable of the advanced healing necessary to facilitate a real recovery, so they simply had to wait. He did not want to accept the outcome. Lee was a strong, brave pupil who shone with the power of youth, and he refused to accept that a future pillar of the village had his career abruptly halted so soon. They would just have to wait for him to be well enough to wake up, and then Lee could decide his future for himself. Guy would support whatever decision he made. How are you still upright? Genma lay slumped across one of the benches, his head in Rita's lap. The Tokubetsu Junin looked exhausted, much the same as the rest of Konoha's population. The remaining genin and chunin were focused on rebuilding efforts in the village, so it was up to the junin to continue taking missions and generate income to fund the rebuild and show other shinobi villages that they were down but not out. Why would I not be? He grinned at his genin teammate. Any opportunity to grow stronger while assisting the village invigorates and energizes me with the power of youth. Genma glared at him, but it lacked any heat. He turned into Rita's stomach with a grumble. Guy had not been lying, as he truly did appreciate the change to push himself and assist the village, but his limbs did not feel as light as they usually did. He found it harder to rouse himself recently, and he knew he was pushing his limits, but he could not stop, not when they had lost so many. He could not afford to let anyone else down. How are your team doing? Rado asked kindly, as Guy sat on one of the chairs opposite them, folding his arms. He could not help the way his back sank in the cushions behind him. I heard they survived? Neji and Tenten are helping with the rebuilding efforts. Guy announced proudly. They have recovered tremendously, and I admire their fortitude. He paused for a half a second, not long enough for anyone else to notice. Lee is improving, was all he said on the third. That's great. Genma had turned back to him, head still on Rita's lap. Kurenai lost both the boys, and the hyuga is retiring from kunoichi duties. Asuma kept one, but I've seen the Yamanaka girl racing around in her wheelchair with no issues, so Inoichi might train her up in torture and interrogation so she can still be a kunoichi. I don't know about the Akamichi kid. Heard he lost an arm. Kakashi's girl survived too, Raida added. She's been working like a demon, I hear. It's a shame about the two boys though. Guy nodded. He had not expected Sasuke to follow in Naruto's footsteps, and he could not imagine how his rival was taking it. He had been defeated after the loss of Naruto, and for a second one to defect from the village, Guy worried for his rival. He had heard rumors that Kakashi was going back into Anbu, but he dismissed them. He did not like rumors anyway. He would hear from Kakashi himself next time he saw him. He desperately hoped it was untrue. He had spent so long trying to get Kakashi out, and he did not know what he would do if his rival went back willingly. He knew the boys leaving had been tough on his rival, but Anbu was not the solution. It had nearly killed him last time. His rival had informed him Naruto was Jiraiya when they'd last spoken, so at least he knew his student would be safe. He would also not be taken back to the village by the Anbu, and Guy could not admit aloud how glad he was for that fact. He hoped Naruto had found what he was looking for. He hoped he was happy now. I should find my students, Guy announced. He had to focus on the students still within his reach. He would always be here if Naruto needed him. I am glad to see both well. You too, Guy, Raida replied over Genma's threat to sleep for a year. He left the station, heading in the direction of the mission assignment desk. Konoha was broken and bruised and hurt, but it was still standing. Guy loved this village, and he knew despite all they had lost, they would recover. They would rebuild. They would not forget what they lost, but they could not let the grief drown them. The shinobi and kunoichi of Konoha burned brightly with the power of youth, and Guy knew that the village would be okay. Naruto stopped behind Jiraiya in the empty clearing, tilting his head as the Sannin turned to him. They had entered the land of waterfalls not too long ago and had left Tsunade and her assistant back in that town, Jiraiya only saying that she'd agreed to go back to Konoha. Naruto didn't really care. He was still a little confused by her. It was like she couldn't make up her mind. Alright, brat. Naruto narrowed his eyes. You and I both know you do not want to be here, Jiraiya stated, and Naruto nodded. No point in disagreeing at this point. You already know you have to stick with me or it's back to Konoha. Why was he stating the obvious? Of course Naruto knew this. It hangs over him like an executioner's katana. He also knew the odds of traveling with Jiraiya for the rest of their lives were almost non-existent. He had yet to solve this problem, but he thought he'd have a little longer. Why not work with me? I can train you. You may not like him, but you can't deny the strength of the Yondaime. I trained him and I can do the same for you. Naruto scowled. Jiraiya had brought this up before and Naruto hadn't entertained it. He didn't want Jiraiya knowing his true strength. He'd wanted the element of the surprise when he made his move. He'd been with the guy long enough now that he knew it wouldn't work. He was still a little sour over that realization. What sort of training? Jiraiya grinned, surprised. The standard taijutsu, ninjutsu, weapon stuff, he offered. You also need to work on using the Kyuubi's chakra. I don't need to do shit. Naruto crossed his arms. Say I agree. Ninjutsu and taijutsu is a given, but what about kenjutsu? You have swords? Naruto pulled the scroll out and unsealed his twin blades. He'd had neglected them a little so Jiraiya wouldn't see them, but he supposed that they'd reached the point of no return. He wanted to become stronger, and Jiraiya was offering that to him without having to go back to Konoha. If he happened to learn the Sannin's weaknesses and pressure points along the way, then who was Naruto not to take advantage? Where'd you get these? He didn't like the look in Jiraiya's eyes. Does it matter? He sealed them away. I have them and I can use them. Jiraiya seemed to take the hint, which was already fucking suspicious. He had been a nosy, pushy bastard since they'd met. We can work on your kenjutsu and your bloodline limit, Jiraiya continued. I have some exercises Minato used to do that should help speed you up. Naruto hated that this was sounding like a good idea. We haven't finished talking about the Kyuubi chakra thing. I say we have. Jiraiya again just left it there, and now Naruto felt wrong-footed. What's the catch? He demanded. Since when do you respect boundaries? No catch. Jiraiya put his hands on his hips. I just realized that there's no point pushing you, brat. You'd bite off your nose to spite your face, so I'll work with what I got. That was a stupid fucking saying, and Naruto told him so. Any other demands? Naruto frowned. Fuck, he'd come this far? It was all well and good training with Jiraiya and getting stronger, but that wasn't the only reason he'd left Konoha. You need to slacken the leash, he met the Sanin's gaze head on. I want to be able to go and do things and explore and have fun without you hanging over my every move. You really want to waste time having fun? Yes, Naruto snapped. I spent my whole life becoming strong enough so I could live my life on my own terms. I never wanted to be strong for the fucking sake of it. I want to have fun. I want to go to festivals. I want to taste all the ramen I can find. I want to swim at the beach. I want nap in a field. I want to do everything I couldn't before. Naruto took a breath. I want to live my life on my terms. I want to live and not just survive for the first time in my fucking life. It felt like he'd ripped open his chest and shoved a kunai into Jiraiya's hands to stab his exposed beating heart with. Only if you let me do my research in peace from now on. He looked up from where his gaze had dropped to the ground. Jiraiya was smiling gently at him and he wasn't sure how to feel about it. I still don't like you, he felt like he had to add. Fair enough, kid, Jiraiya laughed. It went over better than he thought it would, but he had no doubt it was going to be anything but smooth sailing from now on. He and Jiraiya would no doubt argue and clash and fight much more in the coming days, but they'd both agreed to it now. Naruto had to stick with this, at least until he figured out how to deal with Jiraiya, Akatsuki and whoever else wanted to fuck him over. The most important thing was that he was free of Konoha and he still had the whole of the elemental nations at his fingertips. He would not let Jiraiya take away the joy he had fought so hard and so long for, even if he had to compromise a little to protect it. Naruto was free and no one would ever be able to take that away from him again. And that concludes the final part of this story. Thank you for spending your time here at Ichiraku Ramen and listening all the way to the end. Your support helps keep these stories alive and allows the shinobi world to continue through new adventures and alternate timelines. If you enjoyed An Emperor's Youth, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to the channel, and turn on notifications so you don't miss future stories. Once again, full credit goes to Red Ninja Last 19, the original writer of this story. If you would like to read the original version, you can find the link to the story in the description below. Let me know in the comments what story you would like to hear next. Until the next time, stay safe, and I'll see you again at Ichiraku Ramen.